I'm Madison Campbell, 31 years old, founder of Stellar Tech Solutions. My company just hit a $20 million valuation, but my family still thinks I'm playing business. When Dad texted about an urgent family meeting, my stomach dropped. Little did I know, they were gathering to stage an intervention for my supposedly failing business. The Forbes recognition sitting in my inbox would change everything. Before I tell you how my family's well-intentioned intervention backfired spectacularly, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe if you want more stories of business triumph against all odds. Growing up in suburban Boston, I was the odd one out in my traditional family. My father, Robert, was a successful investment banker who worked for the same firm for 30 years. He valued stability above all else, frequently telling us at dinner, security isn't exciting, but it pays the mortgage. My mother, Catherine, a former elementary school teacher, had given up her career to become a full-time homemaker when my older sister Heather was born. Academically, I always excelled. Straight as academic decathlon medals, science fair awards, my bedroom walls were covered with achievements. But somehow, it was never quite enough. Heather was the perfect daughter. She followed our parents' expectations to the letter. She attended Princeton as our father had, majored in economics, and secured a position at a prestigious consulting firm immediately after graduation. At family gatherings, my parents beamed with pride introducing Heather, the consultant, while I was simply Madison, our younger one. My entrepreneurial tendencies appeared early. At 8, my lemonade stand wasn't just a summer activity. I had calculated profit margins, experimented with different recipe formulations based on customer feedback, and expanded to 3 neighborhood locations by recruiting friends to work on commission. By high school, I was selling handmade jewelry online and making enough to fund my own savings account. "It's cute that you have these little projects," Mom would say, patting my head even when I was 17. "But you need to focus on activities that will get you into a good college." When I announced I wanted to study business, Dad scoffed. "Business isn't a real major, Madison. Law or medicine, those are careers with a future." Despite their wishes for an Ivy League education focused on a respectable profession, I chose Boston University's business program. The day I received my acceptance letter, Mom cried, not tears of joy, but disappointment. "Boston University is fine," she said, emphasis on fine in a way that clearly meant it wasn't. "But I just don't understand why you wouldn't try harder for Harvard or Yale." College became my first taste of freedom. I thrived in business classes, absorbing everything from accounting principles to marketing psychology. While other students partied, I founded the Campus Tech Startup Club, organizing speaker events with local entrepreneurs. Professor James Lambert recognized my potential and became my first real mentor, the first adult who didn't treat my ambitions like a phase I would outgrow. During my junior year, I landed an internship at TechNow, a struggling software company. Within weeks, I identified critical flaws in their business model and customer acquisition strategy. I wrote a comprehensive analysis and nervously presented it to my manager. He was impressed enough to share it with the CEO, who implemented several of my recommendations. 3 months later, the company's new direction led to a 30% increase in revenue. I graduated with honors, with several prestigious corporate job offers in hand. My parents had already planned my future. Take the highest paying position, work my way up the corporate ladder, find a nice husband preferably with a law degree, and settle into a comfortable suburban existence identical to theirs. The night before graduation, Dad handed me a folder containing apartment listings in the right part of Boston and information about the 401k program at Jensen Financial, where he'd pulled some strings to get me an interview. "This is your path to success," he said confidently. "Trust me, I know what I'm talking about." I thanked him politely, knowing I had already accepted a position at Innovate Tech, a small but promising firm where I'd be learning the industry from the ground up. When I broke the news over graduation lunch, Dad nearly choked on his salmon. "You're turning down Jensen Financial for a company nobody's heard of? For half the salary." His face flushed red with anger and incomprehension. "Robert, calm down," Mom said, placing a hand on his arm while shooting me a disappointed look. Madison has always needed to learn things the hard way. My sister Heather, ever the diplomat, tried to smooth things over. Maybe this small company will be a good stepping stone. She can always apply to Jensen later when she realizes she needs stability. That was my family in a nutshell, unable to conceive that I might have a different definition of success than theirs. At Innovate Tech, I absorbed everything. I volunteered for projects outside my job description, stayed late studying market trends, and built relationships with clients and vendors. Nights and weekends were spent developing my business concept, a cybersecurity solution for small to medium businesses who couldn't afford enterprise-level protection, but were increasingly becoming targets for hackers. Every Sunday dinner at my parents' house became an interrogation about when I would find a real job. When I excitedly shared developments in my business plan, Dad would interrupt with news about Heather's latest promotion or her boyfriend from a good family. The breaking point came when I overheard Dad on the phone with his friend. Madison's still in her rebellious phase, playing entrepreneur instead of building a career. She'll grow out of it when reality hits. I was 26 years old with a solid business plan, market research, and determination. To my family, I was still a child chasing an impractical dream. The final rejection of my business plan came from a bank loan officer who barely glanced at my proposal before declining. "Perhaps get a few more years of experience," he suggested condescendingly. "Or find a male co-founder with an established track record." That night, I made a promise to myself. I would prove everyone wrong. Not just my family, but every person who had dismissed my ambitions. Success would be my vindication. With $15,000 in savings and a determination fueled by years of dismissal, I quit my job to launch Stellar Tech Solutions. When I told my parents over dinner, Mom dropped her fork with a clatter. "You did what?" Dad's voice was eerily calm, the quiet before the storm. "I started my own company," I repeated, trying to sound confident despite my racing heart. "We're going to provide affordable cybersecurity solutions for small businesses." "We?" Mom latched onto the word. "Who's we?" "Well, right now it's just me, but I'll be hiring soon." Dad laughed, not his genuine laugh, but the short, dismissive one he reserved for ideas he found absurd. "Madison, be reasonable. You'll be bankrupt within 6 months. No experience, no connections, no capital. This isn't how successful businesses start." "I have experience, I've made industry connections, and I have enough capital to get started," I countered. $15,000 isn't capital," Dad scoffed. "It's barely a down payment on a car." "I don't need your approval," I said finally. "Just your support. Or at least your respect for my decision." "Respect is earned," he replied coldly. "And this decision hasn't earned any." I left with Mom calling after me, "We're just worried about you, honey." But worry and dismissal are different emotions with the same expression in my family. My first office was a tiny space in an industrial area on the outskirts of Boston. The rent was cheap because the building had seen better days. The elevator worked only sporadically, the bathroom was down the hall. And the walls were so thin I could hear the graphic design company next door arguing about font choices. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by determination and alarming amounts of coffee. My dining table became a desk, my living room a storage area for equipment. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford as I built my website, developed marketing materials, and refined my service offerings. The first potential client meeting was with Greenfield Accounting, a local firm with 20 employees. I spent days preparing my presentation, practicing my pitch until I could recite it in my sleep. I arrived early, dressed in my only business suit, confident that my thorough preparation would win them over. Within 10 minutes, the owner stopped me mid-sentence. "This all sounds very technical, but how many clients do you currently have?" "As a new company, I'm in the process of building my client base," I answered carefully. "So none," he stated flatly. "Call me when you have a track record." I cried in my car afterward, not from sadness, but from frustration. The classic catch, 22. Can't get clients without experience. Can't get experience without clients. That night, I rethought my entire approach. If established businesses wanted proof, I needed to find clients who couldn't afford to be so selective. I pivoted to targeting startups and very small businesses, companies with as much to prove as I had. I offered free security assessments, showing them vulnerabilities they didn't know existed. This approach worked. My first paying client was Bloombucks, a flower delivery startup with 5 employees and a website full of security holes that could have exposed customer credit card information. While they couldn't afford much, having one client led to referrals. Soon I was serving 5 small businesses, earning just enough to keep the lights on at my office, but not enough for a salary. For 3 months, I lived on ramen noodles and the cheapest groceries I could find, putting every penny back into the business. The breakthrough came unexpectedly through networking. At a local tech meetup I almost skipped because I couldn't afford the $15 entrance fee, I met Douglas Chin, the CTO of Midstate Healthcare, a regional medical provider with 30 locations. Their current security provider was charging a fortune for outdated protection. After 2 meetings and a detailed proposal, I landed my first major client, a 1-year contract worth enough to hire my first employee. Amy Wilson became my first team member. A brilliant security analyst who had been overlooked at her previous job because she didn't have a computer science degree. She believed in my vision when I could barely afford to pay her. Together in our tiny office, we developed a more comprehensive security package that became our signature offering. Just as things were looking up, disaster struck. A competitor with deeper pockets and industry connections swooped in and stole Midstate Healthcare, offering them a slightly lower rate than ours. Suddenly, our biggest client was gone. And we had 2 weeks of operating capital left. Maybe this is a sign, Mom suggested when I made the mistake of confiding in her. You gave it a good shot. There's no shame in admitting it didn't work out. Instead of giving up, I leveraged the crisis into innovation. Amy and I worked around the clock to develop a proprietary security monitoring system that could detect and neutralize threats more efficiently than anything on the market for small businesses. It was our Hail Mary pass, and it connected. When a widespread ransomware attack hit several local businesses but left our remaining clients unaffected, word spread quickly. Our phones started ringing. The Boston Business Journal ran a small feature on our preventative system. Within a month, we had signed 15 new clients and hired 2 more security specialists. 6 months later, we celebrated our first profitable quarter. I bought a bottle of champagne and 3 plastic cups, toasting with Amy and our new team members in our still cramped office with the flickering fluorescent lights. When I called my parents to share the news, Mom said, "That's nice, dear," before immediately asking if I'd met any interesting men lately. Dad's response was equally dismissive. First quarters can be misleading. Let's see if you can sustain it. My sister Heather was slightly more supportive, sending a brief congratulatory text, though it was followed by an invitation to meet her new boyfriend, an investment banker Dad had introduced her to. At a family dinner shortly after, Dad tried to introduce me to Julian Parker, the son of his golf buddy who worked in real estate development. Madison's playing at running a tech company, Dad explained to Julian, while I sat there, humiliated. It's not playing when you're profitable, I corrected him, maintaining my composure despite the anger bubbling inside. Julian looked uncomfortable. What kind of tech? Before I could answer, Dad interrupted. Nothing you would understand. Very niche. I excused myself early that night, driving home with tears of frustration blurring my vision. Why couldn't they see what I was building? Why wasn't my success on my own terms enough? The turning point in my early business journey came when I met Janet Torres, a veteran tech executive who had built and sold 2 successful security companies. She spoke at a conference where I was the youngest attendee by at least a decade. Afterward, I worked up the courage to introduce myself. Your question during the panel was the most insightful one asked, she said, surprising me. Tell me about your company. For the first time, someone with industry clout listened, really listened, to my vision. Janet became my mentor, opening doors I didn't know existed and providing guidance when I felt lost. When Stellar Tech won its first industry award for innovation, Janet attended the ceremony with me. My parents were invited but declined, citing a neighborhood barbecue they couldn't miss. Heather sent a text, "Congrats on your award thing." Standing on that small stage, accepting my first professional recognition without a single family member in attendance, I realized I was building two things, a company and the emotional resilience to succeed without the validation I'd always craved. 3 years into running Stellar Tech Solutions, we had grown to 25 employees. Our proprietary security monitoring system had evolved into a comprehensive platform that was disrupting the industry. We had moved from the tiny industrial office to a proper space in downtown Boston with windows that actually opened and chairs that didn't squeak. The series of funding round had been nerve-wracking but successful, $2 million from investors who believed in our vision and growth potential. Janet had made introductions to key venture capitalists who specialized in cybersecurity, and our numbers spoke for themselves. Our client retention rate stood at 96%. Unheard of in an industry where companies regularly switched providers looking for better deals. My personal life, however, remained complicated. Despite objectively impressive accomplishments, my family still treated my company as a quirky hobby that had somehow lasted longer than expected. At my cousin Sarah's wedding, I overheard Mom telling Aunt Linda, "Madison is still doing that computer thing. We're worried about her future, you know. No benefits, no retirement plan." I wanted to interrupt and explain that I provided comprehensive benefits for all my employees, including myself, and that our company retirement plan was more generous than most corporate offerings. But I stayed silent, knowing from experience that facts didn't change perceptions in my family. Dad had developed a new habit of sending me articles about the tech bubble and stories of failed startups. Each email came with variations of the same message. Something to consider before it's too late. The Thanksgiving dinner disaster occurred shortly after we secured a contract with a regional bank, beating out competitors 3 times our size. I arrived at my parents' house buoyed by the success, finally feeling like I had something that would impress even my father. As we passed the mashed potatoes, Dad asked Heather about her recent promotion to senior consultant. She launched into a detailed explanation of her new responsibilities, the size of her team, and her company's expansion plans. My parents listened attentively, asking follow-up questions and beaming with pride. When there was finally a lull, I mentioned our new banking client. "A local bank?" Dad clarified, his tone suggesting he was unimpressed. "Regional," I corrected. "They have 63 branches across 3 states. He nodded. "Small but respectable." Of course, in banking, the real security challenges are at the national level. Actually, I began. Prepared to explain how regional banks often faced more sophisticated attacks because criminals assumed their security would be weaker, but Dad had already turned to my sister's fiancé, Brad. "Brad, didn't your firm just land Northeastern National Bank as a client?" And just like that, my achievement was diminished and the conversation redirected. Later, helping Mom with dishes, I heard her on the phone with my grandmother. "No, Madison still hasn't found a nice young man. Too busy with work, I suppose." "Yes, she's still doing that startup thing." "No, I don't really understand it either." Sister's engagement to Brad, an investment banker who had my father's unqualified approval, added another layer of complexity. Brad had an MBA from Wharton and the kind of confidence that came from never having his abilities questioned. He had taken to offering me unsolicited business advice whenever we met. "You know, Madison, with your user base, you should really consider a freemium model," he stated authoritatively at Heather's engagement party, despite knowing nothing about cybersecurity or B2B sales models. "We've analyzed that approach," I replied evenly. "It doesn't work for our market segment or service type." "Trust me on this," he winked. "I've seen the numbers on these tech plays. You need scale before you need profit." I bit my tongue instead of explaining that we were already profitable and that our growth strategy was based on service quality, not the scale at all costs mentality that had driven so many startups into the ground. What my family didn't know, what I had deliberately kept from them to avoid their dismissal or attempts to help, was that Janet had nominated me for the Forbes Most Powerful Women in Tech list. The nomination alone was an honor I could hardly believe, but I knew better than to share the news. If I didn't make the list, their "I told you so" reactions would be unbearable. And if by some miracle I did make it, I wanted the validation to be complete and irrefutable before revealing it. Meanwhile, Stellar Tech was thriving. We had secured a government contract to protect municipal systems in 3 cities, beating out established competitors through a combination of innovative technology and personalized service. Our team was passionate and committed. We had created a company culture that valued both excellence and work-life balance, something I'd rarely seen in the tech world. Despite external success, I still struggled with imposter syndrome. Each achievement came with a voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my father's. "You just got lucky. The next challenge will expose your limitations." The triggering event came when TechForce, a major player in enterprise security, approached us with an acquisition offer. The number was substantial, enough that I could have walked away at 31 with financial security for life. After careful consideration and discussions with my leadership team, I declined. We had more to build, more to prove, and I wasn't ready to give up control of my vision. Somehow, Dad found out about the rejected offer. He didn't tell me how he knew, but I suspected he had connections at TechForce or their investment bank. He called me immediately. "Madison, tell me you didn't really turn down the TechForce offer," he demanded, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I did," I confirmed. "It wasn't the right move for our company at this stage." "Not the right," he sputtered. "Do you have any idea what kind of opportunity you just threw away? This is exactly the kind of reckless decision-making that worries us." "Dad, I appreciate your concern, but this is my company and my decision. This isn't just about you," he exclaimed. "What about your employees? Their job security? What about your future? You could have been set for life." "We're doing this my way," I said firmly. A heavy silence fell before he spoke again, his voice unnervingly calm. "Your mother and I would like you to come over for dinner this Saturday. Heather and Brad will be there too. We need to have a family discussion about your situation." "My situation?" I repeated incredulously. "Your business situation," he clarified. "We're concerned. And as your family, we want to help before things get worse." I agreed to the dinner mostly out of shock. After hanging up, I realized what was happening. They were staging an intervention, as if my successful business were a destructive addiction. The week leading up to Saturday's dinner was tense. I received multiple texts from Mom asking if I had reconsidered the TechForce opportunity and whether I was open to Brad's insights about business strategy. Heather called to tell me cryptically, "Just hear them out, okay? They mean well." What none of them knew was that our company had just been valued at $20 million during confidential discussions with new investors. What none of them knew was that the Forbes list would be announced the following week. What none of them knew was that I had stopped needing their approval long ago. I just hadn't stopped wanting it. Saturday evening arrived with an unseasonable chill. As I drove to my parents' suburban home, the same house where I'd grown up, I felt a sense of dread mingled with defiance. The perfectly manicured lawn and symmetrical shrubs reflected my parents' love of order and conformity, qualities my life had deliberately lacked. I parked behind Heather's BMW and my father's Mercedes, my modest Subaru looking out of place even in the driveway. Taking a deep breath, I reminded myself that I was no longer the insecure young woman desperate for validation. I was the founder and CEO of a successful tech company, regardless of whether my family recognized it. Mom opened the door before I could knock, her anxious smile failing to mask the concern in her eyes. She wore her formal cardigan, the cashmere one reserved for important occasions, another sign that this evening was no ordinary family dinner. "Madison, you're here," she said, hugging me briefly. Everyone's in the living room. I followed her through the familiar hallway lined with family photos. I noticed that my college graduation picture had been replaced with a wedding photo of Heather and Brad. The symbolism wasn't subtle. The living room had been rearranged since my last visit. The furniture formed a semicircle around the coffee table, reminiscent of how I imagined addiction interventions from TV shows. Dad sat in his leather armchair, a folder of papers on his lap. Heather and Brad occupied the love seat, both dressed as if for a business meeting. An empty spot on the sofa clearly awaited me. Madison, Dad nodded, not rising to greet me. Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice as I took my designated seat. Mom offered drinks, which everyone declined. The atmosphere was suffocating with unspoken tension. Dad cleared his throat, a sound that had signaled the beginning of serious discussions throughout my childhood. We've asked you here today because we're concerned about the direction of your enterprise. My company, I corrected. Stellar Tech Solutions. Yes, your company, he conceded. The word sounding foreign on his lips. The fact that you turned down a legitimate acquisition offer demonstrates concerning judgment. He opened the folder and pulled out what appeared to be a printed PowerPoint presentation. My father, ever the investment banker, had created slides for my intervention. I've prepared some materials that outline the reality of tech startup failures, he continued, handing copies to everyone. 70% fail within 10 years. 90% of cybersecurity startups specifically fail to gain significant market share. I glanced at the document, noting that his statistics were outdated and taken out of context. Before I could point this out, he continued. Madison, we've supported your experiment for 4 years now. But refusing a legitimate exit opportunity isn't just unwise, it's reckless. Supported. I echoed, incredulous. In what way have you supported my company? Mom interjected, her voice gentle but patronizing. Emotionally, dear. We've worried about you, but respected your need to try this out. Try this out, I repeated flatly. Mom, I'm not at summer camp. I've built a multi-million-dollar company. Brad cleared his throat. Madison, speaking as someone who analyzes tech investments professionally, the market indicators suggest a correction is coming. Cybersecurity is particularly vulnerable to consolidation. I turned to him. And speaking as someone who actually runs a cybersecurity company, our market position is stronger than ever. Madison. Dad's voice hardened. I've taken the liberty of speaking with Thomas Jenkins at Fuller Investments. He paused, letting the name of his college roommate and prominent venture capitalist hang in the air. He's willing to look at your books and give an objective assessment of your company's viability. The realization that my father had been discussing my business behind my back made my blood run cold. You did what? It's a favor, he insisted. Tom specializes in distressed tech assets. We are not distressed, I stated through gritted teeth. Honey, Mom leaned forward, placing her hand on mine. We're just worried about your future. If this doesn't work out, and statistically, it might not, you'll have a gap in your resume. Have you considered what comes next? What comes next is continued growth, I replied, pulling my hand away. There's no shame in accepting help. Mom continued. If you need to regroup, your old room is always available. The suggestion that I might move back home at 31 after building a successful company was so absurd I almost laughed. Heather had remained suspiciously quiet, absorbed in her phone rather than participating in the ambush. Suddenly, she gasped loudly, her eyes widening as she stared at her screen. What is it? Mom asked, startled by the interruption. Heather looked up, her expression a mixture of shock and confusion. Why is your face on Forbes' most powerful women in tech list? She asked, turning her phone to show a notification from the Forbes app. The room fell silent. Dad's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Mom froze mid-gesture. Brad lunged across to look at Heather's phone. Let me see that, Dad finally managed, taking the phone from Heather. He read aloud, his voice increasingly strained. Madison Campbell, founder and CEO of Stellar Tech Solutions, has revolutionized cybersecurity access for small and medium businesses. At 31. She's the youngest entrant on this year's list, with her company recently valued at $20 million. He trailed off, looking up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between shock and bewilderment. $20 million? Mom whispered. Your company is worth $20 million? As of last month's valuation, yes, I confirmed, maintaining my composure despite the emotional turmoil inside. Brad had pulled out his own phone and was frantically Googling my company. There's a whole profile, he reported, scrolling rapidly. Client testimonials, industry analysis. How did we not know about this? You never asked, I said simply. You were too busy planning my intervention to consider that I might actually be succeeding. Dad was still holding Heather's phone, staring at my photograph on the Forbes list as if trying to reconcile it with the daughter he thought he knew. The photo shoot was last month, I added. They swore me to secrecy until the official announcement. But the TechForce offer, Dad stammered. If you're doing this well, why would you turn it down? Because I'm building something valuable on my own terms, I explained. Something I believe in. The same reason I've made every decision you've questioned since I started this company. The painful silence that followed was broken by Mom's small voice. We were just trying to help. I looked at my family, my accomplished, well-meaning, completely misguided family, and felt a strange mixture of vindication, hurt, and pity. I know you think you were, I said finally, standing up and gathering my purse. But real help starts with respect. And none of you have respected me enough to believe I might succeed without your intervention. I walked to the door, then turned back. The Forbes issue comes out next Tuesday. I'd be happy to sign a copy for each of you. With that parting comment, petty, perhaps, but deeply satisfying, I walked out of my childhood home, leaving my family in stunned silence with their now useless intervention materials scattered across the coffee table. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of streetlights and conflicting emotions. Vindication warred with hurt, triumph with a lingering sense of loss. I had finally received the validation I'd unconsciously craved for years, not just from Forbes, but reflected in my family's shocked faces. Yet the victory felt hollow. Why had it taken external recognition for them to take me seriously? Once home, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto my sofa, letting tears flow freely for the first time in months. They weren't tears of sadness exactly, more a release of years of pent-up frustration and the complicated relief of finally being seen. My phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications. I ignored most of them but saw Heather's name appear multiple times. Finally, around midnight, I answered her call. Madison, she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I don't even know what to say. Congratulations would be a start, I replied, not making it easy for her. Congratulations, she said immediately. But also, I'm sorry. We've been horrible. Not horrible, I softened slightly, just dismissive. Which is horrible when it's your life's work, she acknowledged. I knew you were doing well, but I had no idea. Forbes, Madison. Forbes. I didn't tell anyone except my executive team, I explained. I was nominated months ago but never expected to actually make the list. Why didn't you at least tell me? I hesitated before answering honestly. Because I was tired of having my achievements minimized. If I didn't make the list, I didn't want to hear, well, it was a long shot anyway. And if I did make it? You wanted to see our faces, she finished for me. Something like that, I admitted. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? Heather asked. I want to hear about your company. The real story, not Dad's interpretation. I agreed, feeling a small bridge forming where there had previously been a chasm. For the next 2 weeks, I deliberately ignored my parents' attempts to contact me. Dad left voicemails that evolved from defensive, "We were just trying to help," to somewhat conciliatory. Perhaps we misunderstood the situation. Mom sent texts ranging from guilt-inducing, "Your father hasn't been sleeping," to awkwardly proud, "I told Mrs. Peterson from church about your Forbes thing." I needed space to process my feelings without their input. Meanwhile, the Forbes recognition transformed my professional life. The morning after the official announcement, I arrived at our office to find it filled with flowers from clients, partners, and even competitors. My inbox overflowed with congratulatory messages and partnership inquiries. Janet called first thing. "I told you," she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "You belong on that list." The Forbes photoshoot had been surreal: professional makeup, lighting crews, and a photographer who had shot celebrities and world leaders. They positioned me in our office, surrounded by monitors displaying our security software interface. The stylist had suggested a conservative blazer, but I opted for the bright blue dress that made me feel confident. "This is me," I had insisted, "not some corporate version of me." My team's reaction to the recognition meant more than any external validation. We closed the office early for a champagne celebration, and I made sure to acknowledge that the achievement belonged to all of us. Amy, my first employee who had taken a chance on an unproven company, gave a tearful toast that left us all emotional. "To the woman who saw potential where others saw risk," she said, raising her glass, "and who taught us all to believe in our own capabilities." While my professional confidence soared, my personal wound remained raw. I finally agreed to speak with my father after he sent an email with the subject line, "I was wrong." The phone conversation was strained. Dad had never been good at admitting mistakes, and his attempt now was awkward at best. "The Forbes recognition is quite impressive," he began formally, as if discussing a stranger's achievement. "Thank you," I replied, not making it easier for him. "I may have underestimated the viability of your business model," he continued. "You definitely did." A long pause followed before he added, "Your mother and I would like to take you to dinner to celebrate properly." I declined, explaining that I wasn't ready for another family dinner. The hurt was still too fresh. "I need some time, Dad." What happened at that intervention? It was the culmination of years of dismissal. That doesn't heal overnight, even with a Forbes feature. He seemed genuinely surprised by this response, as if the external validation should have erased all previous wounds. This reaction only confirmed that he still didn't understand. Coffee with Heather proved more productive. Meeting at a cafe halfway between our offices, she arrived with a printed copy of my Forbes profile, asking me to sign it, half joking but also sincere. "I've been thinking about everything," she said after we ordered. "How different our paths have been, how differently Mom and Dad treated us." "You followed their script," I pointed out. "I rejected it." "I know," she nodded. "But I never stood up for you. I bought into their narrative that you were being reckless when you were actually being brave." This admission from my always perfect sister meant more than I expected. We spent 2 hours really talking, about our childhood, our different approaches to life, and how our parents' expectations had shaped us both, just in different ways. "Brad was insufferable after your intervention exit," she confided with a small smile. "He keeps saying he knew you were undervalued in the market, but no one would listen." We both laughed, the tension between us easing for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. During this period of family recalibration, I also started working with Dr. Melissa Chin, a therapist specializing in high-achieving women from traditional families. Our sessions helped me understand that my drive for success was partially fueled by a desire for parental approval I might never fully receive. "Your parents' inability to validate your choices reflects their limitations, not yours," Dr. Chin pointed out. "The question is, can you accept their limitations while still maintaining a relationship?" This question haunted me as I prepared for my first public speaking engagement following the Forbes recognition, a keynote address at the Northeast Technology Summit. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd become an overnight success after years of methodical work. Standing backstage before my presentation, I was surprised to receive a text from Dad. "Your mother and I are in the audience. Regardless of what happens next, we're proud of you." I scanned the crowd as I took the stage and spotted them in the middle section, Mom nervously clutching her purse, Dad sitting ramrod straight in his suit. They had come without telling me. a small gesture that spoke volumes about their efforts to understand my world. The speech was a success, garnering a standing ovation and numerous requests for meetings afterward. When I finally made my way to my parents, Mom hugged me tightly. "I didn't understand half of what you said," she admitted, but everyone was so impressed. Dad extended his hand formally, then seemed to think better of it and pulled me into an awkward hug. "That was eye-opening," he said, genuine respect in his voice for perhaps the first time. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a beginning, a recognition that we might build something new from the rubble of old expectations. The day the Forbes issue hit newsstands, our office received a delivery, a framed copy of the magazine cover, sent by Janet with a note that read simply, "First of many. Never doubt yourself again." I hung it in our reception area, not as a boast, but as a reminder to every employee that their work was being recognized at the highest levels. Media attention followed quickly. Local business publications requested interviews. Industry blogs analyzed our business model. The Boston Business Journal ran a feature titled "Hometown Disruptor," complete with childhood photos my mother had enthusiastically provided without my knowledge. "You always looked so serious in your school pictures," the journalist commented during our interview. "Like you were already planning world domination." "Not domination," I corrected. "Transformation." The increased visibility brought new opportunities and challenges. Investors who had previously ignored my emails now sought meetings. Potential clients reached out directly. Competitors suddenly suggested exploratory partnership discussions. My calendar filled with appointments that would have been impossible to secure months earlier. We leveraged the momentum to expand internationally, establishing our first overseas office in London to serve European clients. The Series B funding round exceeded expectations, securing $50 million at a valuation that made the previously impressive $20 million seem modest. Through it all, I remained focused on our core mission, making enterprise-level cybersecurity accessible to businesses of all sizes. When a prominent venture capitalist suggested pivoting to focus exclusively on larger, more profitable clients, I declined. "The small businesses are why we exist," I explained. "They're not a stepping stone, they're our purpose." My new executive team, now including a CFO, CTO, and COO, supported this vision, even when it meant slower growth than some investors preferred. We relocated to a headquarters that accommodated our 100-plus employees while maintaining the collaborative culture we'd established when there were just 5 of us. At home, my parents had transformed the Forbes magazine into something of a family relic. Mom mentioned during a phone call that Dad had purchased 5 copies, keeping one in his office and proudly showing it to colleagues and clients. "Your father tells everyone his daughter is in Forbes," she reported with a mixture of pride and bewilderment. "Even the checkout clerk at Whole Foods knows about it now." The family dinner scene shifted dramatically. At Thanksgiving, 6 months after the intervention turned revelation, the dynamic was noticeably different. Dad asked detailed questions about our European expansion. Mom mentioned a cybersecurity segment she'd seen on the morning news, wondering if it affected our business. Most surprisingly, Heather announced she was leaving her consulting position to join a tech startup. "I've been watching how fulfilling Madison's work is," she explained, while Dad looked momentarily alarmed before carefully composing his features. "That sounds interesting," he managed, glancing at me. "I'm sure Madison can offer some guidance about the startup world." This small acknowledgement of my expertise represented massive growth from the man who had once dismissed my business as playing entrepreneur. The most significant family development came when Heather approached me with an unexpected proposal. After several months at her tech startup, she had discovered a passion for operations and organizational efficiency. "I've been thinking," she said during one of our now regular sister lunches. "Stellar Tech is growing so quickly. Have you considered bringing on a dedicated COO?" I studied her face, understanding the unasked question. "Are you suggesting yourself?" She nodded nervously. "I know it sounds crazy, We've always been on such different paths, and I'm not pretending to have your technical knowledge. But operations, scaling, organizational development, that's what I've been trained to do. The idea of working with my sister, the same sister who had sat silently through my family intervention less than a year ago, seemed fraught with potential complications. Yet, something about it felt right, a chance to rebuild our relationship on new, equal footing. After thorough interviews with my executive team and board, I insisted on no special treatment. Heather joined Stellar Tech as Chief Operating Officer. Her corporate background complemented my entrepreneurial approach, creating a balance that benefited the company. Working together revealed dimensions of Heather I'd never appreciated: her meticulous attention to detail, her talent for diplomatic problem-solving, her genuine respect for the company I'd built. In turn, she saw my creative vision and strategic thinking in action daily. I had no idea, she confessed after her first month, the complexity of what you've been managing all these years. I'm kind of in awe. My relationship with my parents evolved more gradually. Mom began sending articles about successful women entrepreneurs with notes like "reminded me of you" or "thought this might interest you." Small gestures, but meaningful ones. Dad's transformation was more surprising. At a family dinner celebrating Heather's new position, he asked about our approach to international regulatory compliance, a legitimate business question rather than a disguised criticism. After dinner, he invited me into his home office, where I noticed the Forbes issue prominently displayed beside family photos. "I want to show you something," he said, unlocking a drawer and removing a faded folder. Inside was a business plan dated 1983, 3 years before I was born. "You tried to start a business?" I asked, stunned as I scanned the document outlining a financial services company catering to middle-income families. "Investment banking was my backup plan," he admitted. "This was my dream." "What happened?" His expression tightened. "I secured initial funding, left my job, signed an office lease. 3 months in, my partners pulled out unexpectedly. The bank called our loan. I lost everything, including our down payment for a house." "I had no idea," I said softly. "Your mother was pregnant with Heather. I needed security, stability. I took the first solid job offer and never looked back." He paused, his voice dropping. Or at least, I tried not to. The revelation transformed my understanding of my father. His opposition to my entrepreneurial path wasn't just stubbornness, it was fear born from his own painful experience. "When you started your company," he continued, "all I could see was history repeating itself. I was trying to protect you from what I went through. By discouraging me at every turn, I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. By pushing you toward what I knew was safe," he corrected. "I was wrong, Madison. Your courage to persist despite everyone's doubts, including mine, that's something I couldn't do." The conversation didn't instantly heal decades of misunderstanding, but it provided context I'd never had before. My father's skepticism came not from lack of faith in me specifically, but from his own unresolved pain. This new understanding allowed me to view my family's behavior through a more compassionate lens. Their fear for me had been expressed as dismissal, but its root was concern, however misguided. The real test came when I was invited to deliver a keynote address at the National Cybersecurity Conference, the most prestigious speaking engagement of my career. I hesitantly invited my parents, expecting them to decline. "We'll be there," Dad responded immediately. "Send the details." Standing at the podium before thousands of industry leaders, I spotted my parents in the 10th row. Dad listened intently, nodding occasionally. Mom beamed with undisguised pride. They gave a standing ovation before anyone else in their section. Afterward, surrounded by attendees wanting to connect, I saw Dad waiting patiently at the edge of the crowd. When I finally reached him, he shook my hand formally. "That was extraordinary," he said, emotion making his voice unsteady. "I have never been prouder to be your father." The words I had waited a lifetime to hear. Later that evening, Mom asked questions about my presentation, genuine questions that showed she had been listening and trying to understand. She still didn't grasp the technical details, but her effort to engage with my world represented tremendous growth. "I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner," she said quietly as we parted. "The remarkable woman you've become." As my company continued to thrive, I found myself increasingly comfortable with who I was professionally and personally. The desperate need for family validation had diminished as I built confidence in my own judgment and surrounded myself with people who recognized my value without requiring external proof. The most unexpected development came during a routine check-in with Janet, who had become not just a mentor but a friend. "Have you considered mentoring young entrepreneurs yourself?" she asked. "Particularly young women facing the same barriers you did?" The suggestion resonated deeply. I established a mentorship program at Stellar Tech, providing guidance and small seed investments to women launching tech businesses. Many of them shared stories of family skepticism painfully similar to my own. "My father thinks tech is for guys," one young founder told me. "He keeps asking when I'm going to get a real job." "Bring him to my office sometime," I offered with a smile. I know exactly how that feels. Personal growth paralleled professional success in unexpected ways. I began dating Eric, a children's book author who found my business accomplishments fascinating rather than intimidating. His creative perspective balanced my analytical nature, and his supportive attitude toward my career was refreshingly uncomplicated. "Your ambition is one of your most attractive qualities," he told me after witnessing a tense negotiation I handled. "It's not something to apologize for or hide." This simple affirmation highlighted how accustomed I'd become to defending my professional passion, even in personal relationships. The family dynamics continued evolving. Dad asked for my input on his investment portfolio, a small request that represented enormous respect coming from him. Mom stopped asking when I would settle down and instead inquired about business developments with genuine interest. Working with Heather strengthened our relationship beyond anything I could have imagined. The competitive tension that had defined our childhood transformed into collaborative respect. We balanced each other's strengths and weaknesses, creating a partnership that benefited both us and the company. We wasted so many years seeing each other as rivals. She reflected during a late-night strategy session. "When we actually make a pretty great team." The journey from the family intervention to industry recognition had been painful but ultimately transformative, not just for my career, but for my understanding of myself and my family. Success hadn't healed the wounds of years of dismissal. Only honest communication and mutual respect could do that. But success had given me the confidence to establish boundaries and expectations for how I deserved to be treated. 1 year after the Forbes recognition, Dad called with an unexpected question. "I'm mentoring a young analyst who's considering leaving to start his own firm. Would you be willing to speak with him? Your perspective would be valuable." My father was asking for my business advice, a request that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. "I'd be happy to," I replied, recognizing the significance of the moment. "Thank you," he said, then added quietly, "It seems I still have things to learn about business after all." It wasn't an explicit apology for years of dismissal, but from my father. It was an extraordinary acknowledgement. Sometimes growth comes not in grand gestures, but in small moments of humility that would once have been impossible. A little over a year after my family's intervention turned revelation, Stellar Tech Solutions celebrated its 5th anniversary. We hosted a gala event in our expanded headquarters, bringing together employees, clients, investors, and partners who had supported our journey. Standing at the podium addressing the gathered crowd, I reflected on the distance traveled, not just as a company but personally. 5 years earlier, I had been working alone in a tiny office, eating ramen to make payroll, while my family waited for my inevitable failure. Now I led a company valued at over $100 million with international operations and a team of exceptional professionals who believed in our mission. Janet, my first true mentor, introduced me at the event with words that brought tears to my eyes. "Some leaders are born from privilege and opportunity. Others forge themselves through fire." Madison Campbell built this company despite obstacles that would have deterred most people, proving that sometimes the most powerful fuel for success is having something to prove. I scanned the audience as I began my speech, finding my parents seated at a table near the front. Mom wore a new dress for the occasion, looking both proud and slightly overwhelmed by the sophisticated gathering. Dad sat with uncharacteristically relaxed posture, nodding encouragingly as our eyes met. The healing journey from pain to acceptance had been neither quick nor linear. For months after the Forbes revelation, I had clung to my hurt, using it as a shield against further disappointment. The vindication of public recognition had initially hardened rather than healed the wound of years of dismissal. The profound lesson emerged gradually. External validation, even from Forbes magazine, couldn't heal what needed internal resolution. Success had changed how others saw me, but the deeper transformation came from changing how I saw myself and my relationship with my family. The greatest challenge in building this company wasn't securing funding or developing technology, I told the anniversary gathering. It was learning to believe in my vision when few others did. To trust my judgment when conventional wisdom pointed elsewhere. To define success on my own terms. I had spent years seeking my parents' approval, measuring my worth through their recognition. The painful irony was that only when I stopped needing their validation did our relationship begin to heal. Dad had taken a significant step by asking for my business advice for his mentee. Even more meaningful was finding the Forbes issue prominently displayed in their living room when I visited, not hidden away as an anomaly but celebrated as part of who I was. Madison. Mom had said during that visit, Jennifer from my book club asked if you might speak to her daughter who's interested in computer science. I told her you're very busy, but perhaps. The fact that my mother now saw me as a potential role model represented extraordinary evolution from the woman who had once suggested I move back home when my business inevitably failed. The new family dynamic wasn't perfect. Dad occasionally slipped into his old habit of offering unsolicited advice before catching himself. Mom still worried about my work-life balance more than she would have for a son. But there was a foundation of mutual respect that had previously been absent. My sister Heather had perhaps undergone the most dramatic transformation. As our company's COO, she had embraced the startup world she'd once viewed with skepticism, thriving in an environment free from our parents' expectations. Our working relationship had deepened our personal bond, replacing decades of comparison and competition with collaboration and appreciation for our different strengths. The family dinner scene from the intervention still plays in my mind sometimes. Heather confessed during a rare quiet moment in our hectic schedule. The shock on Dad's face when he saw the Forbes notification. I'd never seen him speechless before. It shouldn't have taken Forbes to make him believe in me, I noted, the old hurt briefly resurfacing. No, she agreed. But maybe he needed that shock to recognize his own blind spot. The company continued to expand, but I had learned to balance ambition with personal well-being. The workaholic who had once slept on an office couch now maintained boundaries between professional achievement and personal fulfillment. My relationship with Eric progressed naturally, free from the family pressure that had complicated previous romances. The mentorship program for female entrepreneurs became one of my most rewarding initiatives. Creating opportunities for young women facing the skepticism I had encountered gave purpose beyond profit to our success. We established a scholarship fund for business students from unsupportive backgrounds, offering not just financial assistance, but a community that believed in their potential. At a recent family dinner, now a monthly tradition rather than an occasion for dread, I watched my parents interact with Eric, discussing his latest children's book with genuine interest. Dad asked thoughtful questions about the publishing industry without offering corrective advice. Mom refrained from her usual hints about wedding plans. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside. I found this while cleaning out some old files, he said, handing me a yellowed newspaper clipping from my high school years featuring my regional win for a business plan competition. I saved it back then but never told you. Perhaps part of me always knew you had something special, even when I was too afraid to acknowledge it. This small confession encapsulated our journey, the long road from dismissal to recognition, from hurt to healing. Success hadn't changed who I was. It had revealed who I had been all along. To myself and eventually to my family. As I conclude this story, I'm reminded that true success isn't measured by valuations or magazine covers. It's found in the freedom to define your own path, to release the need for external validation, and to forge relationships based on authentic acceptance rather than conditional approval. Have you ever had your achievements dismissed by those whose support you most wanted? Did external recognition finally change their perspective, or did you learn to find validation within yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their vision deserves to be pursued, even when others don't yet see it. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the people who don't initially believe in your dreams are the ones most surprised by your success. I am Kimberly Andrews, 35 years old, sitting quietly at my family's dining table, enduring another round of thinly veiled disappointment. My brother talks about his hospital promotion while my mother sighs, squeezing my hand with that familiar look of pity. Dad focuses on his roast beef, avoiding eye contact when my career comes up. 10 years of this ritual, 10 years of being the family failure despite everything I'd accomplished. The television drones in the background. CNN providing white noise to mask the awkward silences between criticisms of my wasted potential. Only I notice when my face suddenly appears on screen. Before I tell you how my family's jaws collectively dropped, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and stick around to see how I went from family disappointment to making military history. I grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in a family where success had a very specific definition. My father, Thomas Andrews, was the chief of surgery at the Regional Medical Center. My mother, Elizabeth, ran a successful law practice specializing in corporate litigation. My older brother, Michael, was already in medical school by the time I graduated high school. Success in our family meant advanced degrees, six-figure salaries, and the respect that came with traditional professional careers. From my earliest memories, I was fascinated by something entirely different. My grandfather, Robert Andrews, had served as a captain in Vietnam. He rarely spoke about his experiences, but in our basement, he kept a small wooden chest. Inside were his medals, including a Bronze Star, along with dog-eared books on military strategy and leadership. When I was 8, I discovered this treasure trove while looking for board games on a rainy afternoon. "What's this, Grandpa?" I asked, holding up the Bronze Star. He took it gently, his weathered hands tracing the outline. "That's something they give you when you do what needs doing, even when you're scared out of your mind," he said simply. From that day forward, I devoured every book on military history I could find. While other girls in my class had posters of boy bands, I had maps of famous battles and quotes from great military leaders. My parents viewed this as a passing phase, even finding it somewhat charming at first. Our Kimberly, always with her nose in those history books. My mother would tell her friends with a proud smile, "She's going to make an excellent historian someday, or perhaps a professor." Throughout elementary and middle school, I excelled academically. Perfect grades, advanced placement classes, president of the student council by 8th grade. My parents beamed with pride at each achievement. Each award added to our family's trophy case. I was following the Andrews family tradition of excellence, or so they thought. In high school, I continued to shine. Captain of the debate team, student body president, and valedictorian of my class. When colleges began sending recruitment letters, my father would sort through them, highlighting the pre-med programs at each institution. "Harvard has an excellent medical program," he'd say, sliding their brochure to the top of the pile. Though Johns Hopkins would put you in a perfect position for a surgical residency. My mother had her own suggestions. "Yale Law has produced more Supreme Court justices than any other school. Something to consider, Kimberly." What they didn't know is that I had been corresponding with military academy recruiters since junior year. I had scheduled interviews, completed fitness assessments in neighboring towns during supposed debate tournaments, and secured congressional nominations without anyone in my family knowing. The night I finally revealed my intentions remains burned in my memory. It was April of my senior year, just weeks before decision letters would arrive. We were having dinner, discussing Michael's first successful appendectomy during his residency. "I've decided where I want to go to college," I announced during a lull in conversation. My father smiled. "Harvard, then?" "Excellent choice." "West Point," I said firmly. "I've applied to the United States Military Academy." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother set down her fork with a small clink that echoed through the dining room. My father's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "That's unexpected," my mother finally said. "When did this interest develop?" "It's always been my dream," I replied. "Since I was 8 years old." My father cleared his throat. "Kimberly, military service is admirable. But you have to think about your future. Your real future. The Andrews family has a tradition to uphold." Initially, there was resistance, arguments, and tears. But when the acceptance letter arrived, there was also a grudging pride. My father, despite his reservations, couldn't help boasting to his colleagues that his daughter had been accepted to one of the most selective institutions in the country. My mother, practical as always, began researching military careers that could translate to civilian success. "You could go into military medicine," she suggested hopefully. "Or perhaps law. The Judge Advocate General's Corps has produced some fine attorneys." Neither of them fully understood that I wasn't choosing the military as a stepping stone to something else. For me, military service itself was the destination, not a detour on the way to what they considered a real career. The summer before I left for West Point, my grandfather pulled me aside during a family barbecue. He pressed something cool and metallic into my palm, his bronze star. "You'll earn your own someday," he said quietly. "But take this with you until then. Remember, leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the courage to find them." I left for West Point with my grandfather's medal secretly tucked into my bag, the only person in my family who truly understood the path I had chosen. West Point was everything I had dreamed of and everything I feared. The rigorous schedule, the exacting standards, the weight of tradition, it was overwhelming and exhilarating all at once. During those first weeks of Beast Barracks, the intense summer training for new cadets, I questioned my decision daily. My body ached from physical training that pushed me beyond what I thought possible. My mind raced to memorize the cadet knowledge requirements, everything from military ranks to weaponry specifications to the honor code that would govern every aspect of our lives. A cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do. While I struggled with the physical demands, academics came naturally to me. By the end of our first semester, I was in the top 5% of our class academically. My parents, during our brief phone calls, latched onto this achievement. "That's wonderful, Kimberly," my mother said. "Those grades will open doors for you after this phase." The phase she referred to as my military commitment, the minimum 5 years of service required after graduation. In her mind, I would fulfill this obligation and then move on to a real career. I didn't bother correcting her. My first major failure came during my second year. Each cadet was assigned leadership positions of increasing responsibility throughout their 4 years. I was given command of a squad during a critical field training exercise. The objectives seemed straightforward: navigate through difficult terrain, establish a defensive position, and hold it against an opposing force of upperclassmen. I had prepared meticulously, studying the terrain maps and creating what I thought was a brilliant plan. But when the exercise began, everything went wrong. I misread our position, leading my squad in circles for precious hours. When we finally found our objective, we were exhausted, demoralized, and easy prey for the opposing force. We were killed within minutes of establishing our position. The after-action review was brutal. "Cadet Andrews, your failure to properly orient your map cost the lives of your entire squad," the instructor said. "In a real combat situation, this wouldn't be a learning experience. It would be a tragedy. That night, I called home, seeking some comfort after such a devastating failure. My father answered. "Dad, I really messed up today," I began, my voice cracking. "What happened?" "Are you hurt?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "No, just. I failed a leadership exercise. Pretty badly." There was a pause before he responded. "Well, Kimberly, perhaps this is a sign. Not everyone is cut out for military leadership. There's no shame in recognizing your limitations." His words stung worse than the instructor's criticism. While he meant to comfort me, what I heard was confirmation of a fear I'd been harboring, that I truly wasn't good enough. The next day, still reeling from both the failure and my father's response, I found myself sitting alone in the library, staring blankly at my tactical manuals. A shadow fell across the table. "Mind if I join you, Cadet Andrews?" I looked up to see Colonel Rebecca Thompson, one of the few female senior officers on campus. I had admired her from afar but had never spoken to her directly. "Of course not, ma'am," I responded, straightening immediately. She sat down and went straight to the point. "I watched your exercise yesterday." My face burned with shame. "Not my finest moment, ma'am." "No, it wasn't," she agreed without sugarcoating it. "But I've been watching you since you arrived, Andrews. You have something rare, a tactical mind that thinks differently. Your plan wasn't conventional, and that's why I was interested." Over the next hour, Colonel Thompson broke down my failed exercise, not to criticize but to analyze. She pointed out where my unconventional approach could have worked with better execution, better communication, and better situational awareness. "Your problem isn't your thinking, Cadet. It's that you haven't learned to trust your instincts while still covering the basics." Colonel Thompson became my mentor, meeting with me weekly for additional training. She pushed me harder than any instructor, making me run orientation courses blindfolded to develop my natural sense of direction, forcing me to make rapid decisions with incomplete information. "In real combat, you never have all the facts," she would say. "You need to get comfortable with uncertainty." By my third year, I had transformed. The once uncertain cadet was now confidently leading training exercises with innovative approaches that regularly defeated upperclassmen. My tactical innovations became case studies for other cadets. Where once I had failed, I now excelled. I graduated from West Point with honors, ranking third in my class overall. At the graduation ceremony, my family attended, dressed in their Sunday best. My mother hugged me tightly, whispering, "We're proud of you, Kimberly. Now you can start planning your next steps." My father shook my hand formally. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Andrews. Your accomplishment is significant." Their words were supportive, but I could still sense the underlying current. This was a chapter to be completed, not a life to be embraced. Only my grandfather, now using a cane and moving slowly, seemed to truly understand the significance of the moment. "You've earned your place," he said simply, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Now go show them what an Andrews can really do." I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army, ready to begin my career in military intelligence. Little did I know that both the greatest challenges and greatest triumphs still lay ahead. My first deployment came quickly, Afghanistan. Just 6 months after completing my specialized intelligence training, I arrived in Kabul with a mix of trepidation and excitement, ready to put my training to the test in a real-world environment. As one of the few female officers in my unit, I faced the dual challenge of proving myself both as a new lieutenant and as a woman in what was still predominantly a man's world. I threw myself into my work, analyzing intelligence reports, identifying patterns that others missed, and developing a reputation for thoroughness and insight. 3 months into my deployment, an opportunity arose that would define my early career. Intelligence reports indicated increased Taliban activity in a neighboring province, but the patterns were inconsistent with their usual tactics. While senior analysts suggested it was merely a diversionary effort, something about the data troubled me. After 3 sleepless nights analyzing intercepts and satellite imagery, I identified what others had missed: a subtle but significant shift in communication patterns that suggested a major attack was being planned against a provincial government center. Not the military base everyone expected to be the target. I brought my findings to Major Richardson, my commanding officer, who listened skeptically but authorized additional surveillance of the government center. 48 hours later, my analysis proved correct when our forces intercepted a heavily armed Taliban unit approaching the center. The potential massacre of government officials was prevented, and my analytical framework was credited. Lieutenant Andrews has demonstrated exceptional analytical capabilities and innovative thinking, read the commendation from Colonel Harris. Her actions directly contributed to saving numerous lives and preserving the stability of a key provincial government. This early success led to increased responsibilities and recognition from superior officers. I was being fast-tracked, given opportunities typically reserved for more seasoned officers. My future seemed bright. Then came the change in command. Colonel Harris was replaced by Colonel William Peterson, an old-school officer who had very specific ideas about military intelligence and about women in combat roles. Almost immediately, I found myself reassigned from field intelligence to an administrative position at headquarters. Your analytical skills will be valuable in assessing broader regional trends, was the official explanation. The unofficial reality was that I had been sidelined. For the next year, I watched as my innovations were implemented by others, often with crucial elements missing because the new intelligence officers didn't fully understand the methodologies I'd developed. I submitted reports and recommendations that disappeared into the bureaucratic void. When the time came for promotion reviews, I was passed over despite my early commendations. My first trip home after being passed over coincided with Thanksgiving. I arrived at my parents' house, exhausted from travel and discouraged by my stalled career. My brother Michael had just been named the youngest chief resident in his hospital's history. The contrast could not have been more stark. "Kimberly, come in, my mother greeted me warmly. Michael was just telling us about his new position. Such wonderful news." Throughout dinner, the conversation revolved around Michael's accomplishments, my father's latest surgical innovation, and my mother's recent legal victory. When the focus finally turned to me, my mother asked with careful politeness, "And how are things in? Where are you stationed now, dear?" "Still Afghanistan, Mom. Same as last year." "Oh, right. And how is that going? Making any progress?" I took a deep breath. "Actually, I was passed over for promotion. It's a temporary setback, but..." "A setback?" my brother interrupted. "Sounds like the Army's finally recognizing your limitations." "No shame in it, Kim. Not everyone can be a star." "Michael," my father admonished mildly before turning to me. "Perhaps this is an opportunity, Kimberly. You've fulfilled what, for years of your commitment now? Only one more to go. And then you can transition to something more suitable." "Dad, I don't want to transition. This is my career. One setback doesn't change that." My mother reached across the table to pat my hand. "Darling, you've always been so stubborn. There's no shame in admitting when something isn't working out. I have a friend whose daughter works in hospital administration. She started in her 30s and is doing wonderfully now." The conversation continued in this vein throughout dinner, with various helpful suggestions about careers I could pursue once I got out of the military. Each comment cut deeper than the last. Underlying the fundamental truth, my family saw my military service not as a calling, but as a mistake to be corrected. This pattern repeated itself at Christmas, at Easter, at my father's birthday celebration. Each family gathering became an exercise in endurance, sitting silently as my career choices were questioned, my setbacks magnified, and my determination treated as misguided stubbornness. "Still a lieutenant, Kim," became my brother's standard greeting. "At this rate, you'll be taking orders from your retirement home nurse." The mockery was difficult enough, but what hurt more was my parents' silence in the face of it. They never joined in, but they never defended me either. Their silence felt like agreement. The final straw came when I learned of a specialized strategic command training program. It was highly competitive, with only 12 officers selected annually, and was generally reserved for those already on the promotion track to major or higher. "Don't bother applying," advised Captain Jenkins, a sympathetic colleague. "Word is Peterson has already blackballed you. Applying against his wishes would be career suicide." That night, I called my grandfather, the only person who might understand. "They're saying I shouldn't even try, Grandpa," I explained after outlining the situation. His response was typically direct. "Since when do Andrew's women let others decide what they're capable of? Your grandmother was told women couldn't be engineers. She retired as a chief structural engineer for Boeing. This is different. Colonel Peterson has direct influence over the selection committee. And if I apply and get rejected, it confirms everything they've been saying about me. If you don't apply, you reject yourself. Saves them the trouble." His voice softened. "Kimberly, the only failure that matters is failing to try." The next day, against all advice, I submitted my application to the Strategic Command Training Program. It was either the beginning of my redemption or the final nail in my military career's coffin. 6 weeks after submitting my application, against all expectations, I received notification of my acceptance into the Strategic Command Training Program. The official letter offered no explanation for why I had been selected despite my recent career stagnation. It wasn't until years later that I learned Colonel Thompson, my West Point mentor, had been on the selection committee and had fought fiercely for my inclusion. The program required relocation to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, far from my support system and familiar surroundings. I packed my meager belongings, including my grandfather's Bronze Star, now a talisman of sorts, and headed into the unknown. The program was even more challenging than its reputation suggested. 16-hour days were standard, combining intensive tactical training, strategic theory, and practical leadership exercises. Of the 12 officers selected, I was the only woman and the only one who hadn't already been promoted to major. On our first day, the program director, General James Harrison, addressed us bluntly. "You're here because someone believes you represent the future of military leadership. My job is to determine if they were right or tragically mistaken. Half of you won't complete this program. Those who do will never look at military strategy the same way again." General Harrison was a legend in military circles, a brilliant tactician whose unconventional approaches had revolutionized modern warfare doctrine. He was also known for his uncompromising standards and brutal honesty. During our first one-on-one evaluation, he pulled no punches. "Lieutenant Andrews, your analytical skills are exceptional, but your leadership approach is constrained by conventional thinking. You're trying to fit your square peg ideas into the round holes of traditional military doctrine. With respect, sir, that's because square pegs get hammered down in the current system." He studied me for a moment. "Then perhaps the system needs redesigning. Your assignment: create an intelligence coordination framework that ignores every existing protocol. Start from scratch. Assume no limitations." This assignment became my obsession. While other participants maintained a semblance of work-life balance, I worked through nights, weekends, and meals. I developed a revolutionary approach to military intelligence coordination that integrated artificial intelligence analytics with human intelligence in ways never before attempted. My concept eliminated traditional hierarchical reporting structures, replacing them with a neural network model where information flowed simultaneously to all relevant parties, analyzed in real time by both AI systems and human specialists. The system would identify patterns and anomalies faster than any existing framework, potentially reducing response time by 60%. When I presented my concept to General Harrison, his expression remained impassive. "Ambitious" was his only comment. "Now prove it works." For the next 3 months, I refined my system, building simulations and testing scenarios against historical data. The results were promising in controlled environments, but military leadership is notoriously resistant to change, especially radical change proposed by a junior officer who had recently been passed over for promotion. My opportunity came during a joint training exercise with NATO forces. A simulated crisis involving multiple coordinated attacks across different regions required rapid intelligence assessment and response. General Harrison authorized a parallel implementation of my system alongside traditional methods. As the exercise unfolded, the traditional intelligence channels became overwhelmed with information, creating bottlenecks and delayed responses. My system, however, processed the information flow seamlessly, identifying the pattern of attacks 3 hours before the conventional analysis and predicting the next 2 targets with 92% accuracy. The exercise observers from the Pentagon were astonished. General Marshall Thornton, Deputy Director of Intelligence Operations, requested an immediate briefing on my system. Lieutenant Andrews, "What you've developed here could revolutionize our entire intelligence apparatus," he said after my presentation. "How soon can this be implemented in a real-world scenario?" Before I could answer, General Harrison intervened. "Lieutenant Andrews has developed the theoretical framework. Implementation would require significant resources and high-level authorization." "You'll have both," General Thornton replied without hesitation. "This is exactly the kind of innovation we've been searching for." Within weeks, a modified version of my intelligence framework was being implemented for a specific operation in Eastern Africa, where terrorist activity had been escalating. I was temporarily assigned to AFRICOM headquarters to oversee the implementation and provide real-time adjustments as needed. The system performed beyond even my expectations. Intelligence processing time decreased by 73%, and predictive accuracy for terrorist movement patterns reached 88%. Most importantly, this improved intelligence led directly to the prevention of 3 major attacks and the neutralization of a key terrorist cell with 0 civilian casualties. The success in Africa led to wider implementation across other theaters, each adaptation proving more successful than the last. My name became associated with the most significant intelligence innovation in decades. Yet despite this professional vindication, my family remained unimpressed. During a Christmas gathering, I attempted to explain the significance of my work. "It's revolutionizing how we process intelligence data," I explained, trying to contain my excitement. "The system's being implemented across multiple command structures now." "That's nice, dear," my mother responded absently before turning to my brother. "Michael, tell everyone about the new cardiac wing they're naming after you." As my brother launched into the details of his hospital's expansion, named in his honor after securing a major donation, I fell silent. No matter what I accomplished, it would never match up to the tangible achievements my family understood: buildings with your name on them, titles that civilians recognized, salaries with additional zeros. I returned to my assignment with renewed determination. If I couldn't earn my family's recognition, I would at least earn the respect of those who understood the significance of my work. Little did I know that my innovation was about to be tested in a crisis that would change the course of my career and life. Following the successful implementation of my intelligence framework, my career trajectory changed dramatically. The promotion that had previously eluded me came through with unusual speed, advancing me to captain with commendations from multiple commanding officers. More remarkably, just 18 months later, I was promoted to major, putting me back on the career track I had originally been groomed for. The intelligence system I had developed, now formally named the Integrated Neural Network Intelligence System, INIS, had become standard protocol across multiple military theaters. What began as a theoretical exercise had transformed into a cornerstone of modern military intelligence gathering and analysis. My role expanded from implementation to strategic development. I was assigned to a specialized team within the Joint Chiefs Strategic Planning Division, the youngest officer ever granted such a position. Our mission was to anticipate global threats and develop preemptive response strategies using the enhanced intelligence capabilities that INIS provided. Colonel James Peterson, who had once sidelined me, now found himself reporting to committees where I was a key member. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, though he was professional enough to acknowledge my contributions. "Your system saved lives in the Mogadishu operation," he admitted during one briefing. "I was wrong about its viability. And about you." It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever receive, and I accepted it with a simple nod. Success, I was learning, sometimes spoke louder than words. By my 33rd birthday, I had been promoted to lieutenant colonel, becoming the youngest woman to achieve that rank in the Army's history. Military Times ran a profile titled "The Intelligence Revolutionary," highlighting both the system I developed and my unconventional career path. I sent copies to my family, hoping they might finally understand the significance of what I had accomplished. My mother called after receiving it. "We saw your article, Kimberly. Very impressive photos. Did you read it, Mom? About the system I developed?" "Of course, dear. Though I must admit some of it went over my head. All that technical jargon." She paused. "Your cousin Stephanie's daughter just got accepted to medical school. First one in her branch of the family. We're all so proud." The conversation shifted to family news. My professional achievement reduced to impressive photos and quickly overshadowed by a distant relative's medical school acceptance. It stung. But by now I had grown accustomed to my family's inability to value what they didn't understand. What none of us knew, what I couldn't have predicted, was that events were already in motion that would make my achievements impossible to ignore. 3 months after my promotion to lieutenant colonel, I was discreetly approached about leading a classified operation. The details were revealed only after I had been moved to a secure facility and signed multiple non-disclosure agreements. A sophisticated terrorist network had been detected planning a coordinated attack against multiple Western targets. My intelligence system had identified patterns that suggested these attacks were imminent, but had not yet pinpointed specific targets or timing. "We need you to lead this operation personally," Colonel Andrews explained General Thornton. "No one understands the system's capabilities better than its creator." For the next 6 weeks, I lived and worked in a secure bunker, sleeping on a cot beside my workstation, rarely seeing daylight. My team and I pushed the INIS system to its limits, feeding it every piece of intelligence available and developing new analytical modules on the fly to process previously unconnected data streams. The breakthrough came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. The system identified an anomalous pattern in seemingly unrelated financial transactions across 5 countries. When cross-referenced with communications metadata and supply chain movements, a clear picture emerged. The attacks were planned for the following Thursday, targeting transportation infrastructure in 7 major cities. With this intelligence, counterterrorism units in each affected country moved into action. All 7 attacks were prevented, hundreds of lives saved, and the terrorist network dismantled in a coordinated international effort that was unprecedented in both its scope and precision. The operation's success brought attention at the highest levels. I was summoned to the White House for a private meeting with the President and Joint Chiefs of Staff. What was discussed in that meeting remains classified, but the outcome would soon become public knowledge. 2 weeks later, I received a phone call from General Thornton. "Colonel Andrews, your presence is requested at the Pentagon tomorrow morning. 0800 hours. May I ask what this concerns, sir?" "You'll be informed upon arrival. Civilian attire is appropriate." The next morning, I was escorted to a conference room where the Secretary of Defense, the Army Chief of Staff, and several high-ranking generals waited. I stood at attention, my heart racing. "At ease, Colonel," the Secretary said. "Please sit down." What followed was so unexpected that I initially thought I had misheard. The Secretary explained that in recognition of my contributions to national security and the revolutionary impact of my intelligence system, I was being considered for promotion to Brigadier General. "This is highly unconventional," the Army Chief of Staff added. "Your age and time in service would normally preclude such advancement. However, your contributions have been exceptional. The promotion would make me the youngest general officer in U.S. military history, a distinction that would inevitably draw significant media attention. Before we proceed, we need to know if you're prepared for the scrutiny this will bring, the secretary continued. Both to you personally and to your family. My family? For a moment, I thought about how they would react. Would this finally be enough to make them understand the significance of the path I had chosen? I am prepared, sir, I responded, and honored by the consideration. The meeting concluded with instructions to maintain absolute secrecy until the official announcement. The promotion would be publicly revealed in exactly 1 week, following final approval procedures. I returned to my apartment that night, overwhelmed by the day's events. The phone rang, my mother, reminding me about the family dinner scheduled for the weekend, 2 days before the announcement would be made public. You are coming, aren't you, Kimberly? Everyone will be there. Michael is bringing pictures from the dedication ceremony for his hospital wing. Yes, Mom. I'll be there. I hung up, smiling at the timing. In less than a week, CNN would be announcing my historic promotion. But first, I would sit through one more family dinner as the disappointing daughter who had chosen the wrong path. The drive to my parents' suburban home that Saturday evening felt surreal. For years, these family gatherings had been exercises in endurance, smiling through thinly veiled criticism. Defending career choices no one in my family understood or valued. Now, with the knowledge of what would be announced in just 2 days, the familiar tension seemed almost comical. I parked behind my brother's Mercedes in the circular driveway. Michael had arrived with his wife Jennifer and their 2 children, right on time as always. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the bottle of wine I'd brought and headed to the front door. My mother answered before I could ring the bell, perfect as always in a tailored dress and pearls. Kimberly, we were beginning to wonder if you'd make it. Traffic was heavy, Mom. Sorry I'm late. I handed her the wine and accepted her brief hug. Oh, how thoughtful. Though we've already opened a bottle of that lovely Cabernet your father prefers. She ushered me inside. Everyone's in the living room. The scene was exactly as I'd expected. My father stood by the fireplace, discussing something with Michael, who was gesturing enthusiastically. Jennifer sat primly on the sofa, keeping a watchful eye on my niece and nephew playing on the floor. My aunt and uncle, my mother's sister and her husband, completed the tableau of Andrew's family success. Look who finally made it, Michael called out, raising his wine glass in my direction. The mysterious Lieutenant Colonel graces us with her presence. It's good to see you too, Michael. I replied evenly, accepting a glass of wine from my father. You're looking well, Kimberly, he said, studying me with the clinical eye of a surgeon. Military life agrees with you, I suppose. Though you could use more sun. Not much opportunity for sunbathing in the Pentagon, Dad. Conversation flowed around me as it always did, Michael's latest surgical innovation. My cousin's law firm partnership, my niece's gifted program acceptance. I nodded and smiled at appropriate intervals, sipping my wine and watching the familiar dynamic play out. Dinner was announced, and we moved to the dining room. My mother had prepared her usual feast, roast beef, scalloped potatoes, green beans with almonds. Comfort food designed to counterbalance uncomfortable conversation. So, Kimberly, my aunt began as we settled around the table, your mother tells me you're still with the Army. Any thoughts about what comes next? You must be approaching your final commitment years. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. I was just telling Kimberly about Sarah Reynolds' daughter. You remember Sarah from the garden club? Her daughter worked for the government for a few years, then transitioned into consulting. Making absolute fortunes now, advising corporations on government contracts. That's an option, I conceded, serving myself some potatoes. Though I'm quite happy with my current path. Happy is one thing, my father interjected. Building a sustainable future is another. You're what now, 35? Time to think seriously about the next stage. Michael couldn't resist joining in. The military's been a fine adventure, Kim, but let's be realistic. The ceiling for women in combat roles is pretty well established. No shame in recognizing when it's time to pivot to something with more potential. I appreciate the concern, I said, maintaining my composure. but my career is actually progressing quite well. Oh, Jennifer perked up. Have you met someone? An officer, perhaps? The assumption that progressing well must refer to my romantic life rather than my professional achievements was so predictable I almost laughed. No, Jennifer. I meant my military career is advancing. I've been leading some significant intelligence initiatives. How nice, my mother said vaguely. Michael, why don't you tell everyone about the new cardiac wing? Did you bring those pictures? My brother launched enthusiastically into the story of his hospital wing, funded primarily by donors he had cultivated, designed with his input, scheduled to revolutionize cardiac care in the region. As he spoke, I noticed the television in the adjacent family room was on, tuned to CNN as was my father's habit during dinner. The volume was low, but the familiar faces of news anchors flickered in the background. They're naming the main research laboratory after me, Michael was saying, passing around glossy architectural renderings. The Michael Andrews Cardiovascular Research Center. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Very impressive, my uncle commented. Making the family name proud, just like your father. I felt the familiar pang, the unspoken comparison, the implication that my contributions somehow fell short of making the family proud. For a moment, I was tempted to break my secrecy oath, to tell them what would be announced on Monday. Instead, I took another bite of roast beef and nodded along. Kimberly. You've barely touched your food, my mother observed. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Mom. Just a little tired from work. You work too hard, she said with a sigh. All those hours, and for what? At least in medicine or law, there's proper recognition. Tangible results. I was formulating a diplomatic response when something caught my eye, the cheering scrolling across the bottom of the CNN screen. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. My father noticed my distraction. Something interesting on the news. Before I could answer, the cheer-in changed to a breaking news alert. The volume automatically increased, a feature my tech-savvy nephew had programmed into my parents' smart TV system for important news alerts. We're interrupting our scheduled programming for this breaking news, the anchor announced. CNN has learned that the Pentagon will be making history Monday with the announcement of the youngest brigadier general in United States history. The table fell silent. All eyes now drawn to the television. According to our Pentagon sources, Lieutenant Colonel Kimberly Andrews will be promoted to Brigadier General in recognition of her revolutionary contributions to military intelligence systems that have transformed global counterterrorism efforts. My photo appeared on screen, my official military portrait in full dress uniform. At 35 years old, Andrews will break the age record for general officers by nearly 7 years. Her rapid rise through the ranks has been described by military historians as unprecedented in modern times. The clatter of my mother's serving spoon hitting the floor broke the stunned silence. My father stood up abruptly, his napkin falling unnoticed to the floor. Michael's mouth literally hung open, a forkful of food suspended halfway to his lips. Kimberly? My mother's voice was barely audible. Is this true? I took a sip of water, trying to maintain my composure despite the surreal nature of the moment. Yes, it was supposed to be announced on Monday. I'm not sure how CNN got the information early. Brigadier General. My father repeated the words as if trying to understand a foreign language. But that's the youngest in United States history, my brother finished, his voice hollow with disbelief. The anchor continued. Andrew's development of the Integrated Neural Network Intelligence System, now known simply as INIS in military circles, has been credited with preventing multiple terrorist attacks and revolutionizing how intelligence is gathered and analyzed worldwide. Military experts are calling it the most significant advancement in intelligence operations since the advent of satellite surveillance. Jennifer was the first to recover. Oh my God, Kimberly. This is incredible. My niece tugged at her mother's sleeve. Is Aunt Kim famous now? The simple question broke the tension. My father started laughing, not his usual controlled chuckle, but a full-bodied laugh that I hadn't heard since childhood. Famous, he managed between laughs. My God, Kimberly. You're making history. My mother had not moved, still staring at the television where my face remained alongside the news ticker announcing my promotion. Tears were streaming down her face. Mom? I said gently. Are you okay? She turned to me, her expression unreadable through her tears. All this time we thought. She couldn't finish the sentence. We thought you were wasting your potential, my father completed for her, his laughter subsiding into something more solemn. When in reality, you were exceeding it beyond anything we could have imagined. Michael stood up and raised his wine glass. To Brigadier General Andrews, he said, his voice sincere for perhaps the first time in our adult relationship. The most successful Andrews in family history. As glasses rose around the table, my phone began vibrating with incoming calls, Pentagon officials, no doubt, scrambling to deal with the leaked announcement. But for this moment, in the dining room where I had so often felt inadequate, I allowed myself to simply be present in the vindication I had never sought but had finally received. The hours following CNN's premature announcement were a whirlwind. My phone rang continuously with calls from Pentagon officials, media outlets, and military colleagues. My parents' home phone line lit up as well, with extended family and friends calling to confirm what they had seen on television. Is it true? Our Kimberly? I overheard my mother saying again and again, her voice shifting from disbelief to pride with each repetition. The formal announcement scheduled for Monday was hastily moved up. A Pentagon press conference was arranged for Sunday morning, giving me just hours to prepare. As I packed to leave my parents' house, my father pulled me aside. Kimberly, I need to say something. He began, his usual composure replaced by an uncharacteristic hesitation. I've been wrong. Completely wrong. Dad, you don't have to. Please, let me finish. He took a deep breath. I've spent years concerned about the wrong things, prestige, titles, traditional definitions of success. I was so focused on the path I thought you should take that I missed the extraordinary journey you were actually on. He looked down at his hands. Surgeon's hands that had saved countless lives, but had somehow failed to grasp the significance of his daughter's work. The truth is, I've been proud of you all along. Terrified for you, yes. Worried you were limiting yourself, absolutely. But always, always proud. Then why? Why didn't I say it? He smiled sadly. Because saying it would have meant acknowledging that you were right to choose your own path. And that would mean admitting I was wrong to pressure you toward mine. It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. As we embraced, I realized that my father's silence had never been disappointment. It had been fear. Fear for my safety in war zones. Fear for my happiness in a career he didn't understand. Fear that his guidance had somehow failed me. My mother's confession came later, as she helped me gather my things. We were so afraid for you, she admitted, folding my sweater with practiced precision. Every news report about casualties overseas, every story about women facing discrimination in the military, we imagined you suffering through all of it. I did face challenges, Mom, but you overcame them. On your own terms. She paused, her hands stilling. I think that's what frightened us most. You never needed our advice or connections or support. You built something entirely your own. My brother's acknowledgement was more typical of his personality, delivered with a mix of humor and grudging respect as he walked me to my car. So, General Andrews, he said, emphasizing the title. I guess this means I have to salute you at family gatherings now. Only if you want to, I replied, smiling. He leaned against my car, suddenly serious. You know what's strange? All these years, I thought I was the successful one. The one following the Andrews family tradition of excellence. He shook his head. Turns out you were redefining what that tradition means. The official promotion ceremony took place 3 days later at the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense presented me with my general stars in a room filled with military leadership, government officials, and media. But what moved me most was seeing my family in the front row, my father sitting tall and proud, my mother discreetly wiping tears, my brother actually recording the ceremony on his phone like an enthusiastic parent at a school play. My grandfather, now 92 and using a wheelchair, had been flown in for the occasion. As I knelt beside his chair after the ceremony, he pressed something into my palm, a small velvet box. "Earn this in Vietnam," he said, his voice frail but clear. "Figure it belongs with your stars now." Inside was his bronze star, the same one he had loaned me for luck all those years ago. I had returned it after graduation. But now he was giving it to me permanently, a symbol of our shared understanding of service and sacrifice. The months that followed brought a whirlwind of changes. My promotion made international news, bringing with it both opportunities and challenges. I became, quite unexpectedly, a symbol for women in the military, receiving thousands of letters from young women inspired by my journey. The media attention was overwhelming at times. Profiles in major magazines, television interviews, even a documentary crew following the implementation of the INIS system in new theaters of operation. I learned to navigate this public role with the same precision I applied to military strategy, focusing on how the exposure could advance important conversations about innovation and inclusion in the armed forces. My relationship with my family transformed as well. My parents began to truly engage with my work, asking questions and seeking to understand rather than simply waiting for me to move on to something else. My mother started a support group for military families in their community. My father offered his medical expertise to veteran healthcare initiatives. Perhaps most surprisingly, my brother and I developed a genuine friendship. The competitive dynamic that had characterized our relationship for decades gave way to mutual respect and even collaboration when his hospital established a specialized treatment center for veterans with traumatic brain injuries. For years into my tenure as Brigadier General, I established the Andrews Initiative for Strategic Innovation, a program designed to identify and nurture unconventional thinkers within the military, particularly those whose ideas might be overlooked in traditional command structures. The program's motto, "Courage to Think Differently," was inscribed beneath my grandfather's bronze star, which I had framed and hung in my office. Throughout this journey, I've reflected often on the lessons learned, not just about military strategy or leadership, but about the nature of success itself and the courage required to define it on your own terms. True success isn't measured by titles or recognition, though those have their place. It's measured by impact, by lives saved, by systems improved, by doors opened for those who follow. My intelligence framework has now been implemented across all branches of the military and adapted for use by allied forces worldwide. The estimated lives saved number in the thousands. That, more than any star on my shoulder, is the achievement that matters most. I've also learned that family disappointment often masks deeper emotions: fear, concern, confusion. My parents and brother didn't understand my path because it was unfamiliar, not because it was unworthy. Their criticism came not from lack of love, but from misplaced worry about my happiness and security. Most importantly, I've learned that the path to exceptional achievement rarely follows conventional routes. Had I followed the well-marked road my family laid out for me, medical school, residency, a prestigious practice, I might have found success of a sort. But I would never have created something truly revolutionary. Innovation, by its very nature, requires stepping away from the expected and embracing the unknown. To those watching this who feel pressured to follow someone else's definition of success, trust your instincts. The road less traveled is less traveled for a reason. It's harder, lonelier, and filled with more obstacles. But it's also where the greatest discoveries are made, where the most meaningful contributions take shape. My grandfather understood this. Leadership isn't about having all the answers, he told me. It's about having the courage to find them. Finding answers sometimes means asking questions no one else is asking, pursuing paths no one else can see. So, what's your path? What convention are you willing to challenge? What failure are you willing to risk in pursuit of something truly meaningful? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed my story, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need encouragement to follow their own unconventional path. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, history isn't made by those who follow the crowd. It's made by those brave enough to lead it in a new direction. The stars on my shoulder aren't just a symbol of rank. They're a reminder that sometimes the most distant, impossible-seeming destinations are the ones most worth reaching for. My name is Ashley Thompson, and I am 32 years old. I always thought family meant something sacred, especially the bond one shared with my dad. That changed the day I found him withering away in that dismal nursing home. The $75,000 I had sent for his specialized Parkinson's care had vanished. My parents betrayed my trust in the worst possible way, choosing my brother's lavish wedding over my father's well-being. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments. And please hit like and subscribe if you want to hear how I turn this heartbreaking situation around with just one phone call to a lawyer. Growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, my dad was my hero. Thomas Thompson was the kind of father who never missed a softball game, who taught me to change a tire before I could drive, and who always had time to listen when Mom was too busy with my younger brother Ryan. Dad was the rock of our family, working 60-hour weeks at his construction management company to ensure we had everything we needed. He was strong, dependable, and seemed invincible to me. That image of invincibility shattered 2 years ago when Dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at 63. I still remember the phone call from my mother, Janet. Her voice unusually small as she explained the tremors in his hands that he had been hiding for months. The doctor had confirmed what they had feared: progressive Parkinson's disease. The prognosis was complicated, but one thing was clear: Dad would need increasing levels of care as the disease progressed. By then, I had built my own life in Boston, working my way up to senior financial advisor at a respected firm. The irony was not lost on me. I helped others plan for their futures while my own family faced such uncertainty. Despite the 2,000-mile distance, I made it a priority to video call my parents at least twice a week. Over the months following his diagnosis, I watched my father change. His confident posture gradually stooped, his voice became softer, and the tremors in his hands grew more pronounced. But his eyes, those kind blue eyes that had always looked at me with such pride, remained the same. 8 months ago, the calls with my parents took on a more urgent tone. Mom explained that Dad's neurologist had recommended a specialized care facility that offered advanced physical therapy and experimental treatments that could potentially slow the progression of his symptoms. Insurance would cover the basic treatment, but the specialized care program would require significant out-of-pocket expenses. I asked for details about the facility, and Mom sent brochures for Sunset Gardens, an upscale care center with spacious private rooms, daily physical and occupational therapy, nutritional counseling, and even arts programs designed specifically for Parkinson's patients. The facility looked beautiful, with garden walkways, large windows, and modern medical equipment. Most importantly, it had specialists who worked exclusively with Parkinson's patients. Mom estimated they would need about $75,000 to cover a year of the specialized care program. It was a staggering amount, but as I reviewed my savings and investments, I knew I could make it work. This was my dad we were talking about, the man who had sacrificed everything for our family. I had always been the responsible one, saving diligently since my first job at 16. My brother Ryan, 3 years younger, had taken a different path. While I pursued education and career advancement, Ryan bounced between jobs, apartments, and relationships. He was charismatic and well-liked, but financial stability had never been his strong suit. Our parents, especially Mom, had always been more lenient with him, covering his rent when he came up short or bailing him out of credit card debt. I had made peace with this dynamic years ago, focusing on building my own success rather than comparing our situations. Ryan had recently settled down somewhat, working at a marketing firm and dating a woman named Melissa for over a year. We were never particularly close as adults, touching base at holidays and occasionally liking each other's social media posts. I knew he still lived in Phoenix, about 20 minutes from our parents, but he rarely mentioned visiting Dad or helping with his care. The night before I transferred the money, I had a long video call with Dad. He seemed more lucid than he had in weeks, though the tremors in his hands were worse as he tried to adjust the computer screen. I will always remember him saying, "Ash, you know you do not have to do this, right? Your mother and I never expected you to support us in our old age." "I know, Dad," I replied, fighting back tears. "But you and Mom supported me through everything. Let me do this for you." The treatments at Sunset Gardens could make a real difference. He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I am proud of you, kiddo. Always have been." The next day, I transferred $75,000 to my parents' joint account. Mom called immediately, effusive with gratitude. "This means everything to us, Ashley. I promise we will use every penny to make sure your father gets the best care possible." We are touring Sunset Gardens again tomorrow to discuss the enrollment process. I hung up feeling a profound sense of relief. Though my savings had taken a significant hit, I felt confident that my father would receive the specialized care he needed. I even started researching flights to visit in a few months, hoping to see improvement from the new treatments. Little did I know that my trust was about to be shattered in ways I could never have imagined. 6 weeks after sending the money, I began to notice subtle changes in my communication with my parents. Our twice-weekly video calls dwindled to brief phone conversations, usually with my mother answering and making excuses about why Dad could not come to the phone. "He is resting," she would say. Or, "He just took his medication and is feeling a bit foggy." When I did manage to speak with him, the calls felt rushed and supervised, with Mom hovering nearby and often answering questions directed at him. I tried not to worry, telling myself that the transition to a new care facility must be challenging for everyone. Mom assured me that Dad was settling into Sunset Gardens well, and that the physical therapy was intensive, often leaving him too tired for long conversations. I wanted to believe her, but something felt off about the situation. Meanwhile, my social media feeds began filling with updates from Ryan. He had proposed to Melissa in an elaborate beachside setup in Cabo San Lucas, complete with professional photography and what looked like thousands of rose petals. A few weeks later, there were posts about venue shopping, cake tastings, and custom invitations. I was surprised by the apparent scale of the wedding plans, knowing that Ryan had always struggled financially. I called to congratulate him, genuinely happy that he had found someone to settle down with, but also curious about the sudden extravagance. Ryan had always lived paycheck to paycheck, occasionally borrowing money from our parents when things got tight. The destination proposal and the high-end wedding planning seemed out of character, or at least beyond his means. During our call, Ryan was uncharacteristically evasive about the wedding costs. "Melissa has always dreamed of a big wedding," he explained. "And with Dad's health being what it is, we want to make sure he can be part of a really special day." I thought the sentiment was touching, if a bit contradictory. If Dad's health was truly the priority, wouldn't a smaller, sooner wedding make more sense? But I kept these thoughts to myself, not wanting to dampen Ryan's excitement. As April approached, I planned a week-long visit to Phoenix to see Dad and check on his progress at Sunset Gardens. I had coordinated with my boss to work remotely, arranging to stay at my parents' house, as I always did when visiting. 2 days before my flight, Mom called to suggest I reschedule. "We are having some renovations done," she explained vaguely. "The guest room is completely torn apart, and there is dust everywhere. It would be better if you came after Ryan's wedding in June." Again, something felt off. My parents had never mentioned renovation plans, and postponing my visit meant I would not see Dad for another 2 months. Still, I reluctantly agreed, not wanting to be a burden if their home was truly in disarray. A few days later, I received a call from Margot, my parents' neighbor and my mother's closest friend since I was in elementary school. She mentioned in passing how generous I was to contribute so much to Ryan's wedding. "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely confused. Oh, Margot hesitated, clearly realizing she had said something she should not have. I just meant, with you helping with the venue and everything. Janet mentioned you were being very supportive. I changed the subject quickly, not wanting to put Margot in an uncomfortable position, but her comment left me deeply unsettled. I had not contributed anything to Ryan's wedding, nor had anyone asked me to. During our next video call, I noticed my mother wearing a designer watch I had never seen before. When I complimented it, she quickly changed the subject. In the background, I could see new furniture in their living room, replacing the well-worn pieces that had been there for years. My unease was growing by the day. I tried calling Sunset Gardens directly, hoping to speak with Dad's care coordinator, but was told they could not discuss patients without proper authorization. When I mentioned my father's name, the receptionist paused, then said they would need to check their records and call me back. They never did. The final straw came during a brief call with Ryan about his upcoming bachelor party. As we were about to hang up, he casually mentioned, "By the way, thanks again for the contribution to the wedding. The venue is exactly what Melissa wanted, and we never could have afforded it otherwise." My blood ran cold. "Ryan, what contribution are you talking about? I never gave you money for the wedding." There was a long pause before he replied. "Oh, I assumed you knew. Mom and Dad said you had sent money to help the family, and since Dad's medical bills were not as high as expected, they were using some of it for the wedding. They said you would want us to have a special day." I ended the call shortly after, my mind racing. Medical bills not as high as expected? That contradicted everything my parents had told me about the specialized care program at Sunset Gardens. And using my money for Ryan's wedding without even discussing it with me? None of it made sense. That night, I booked a flight to Phoenix for the following day. No warning, no coordination with my family. I needed to see my father and find out exactly what was happening with the money I had sent for his care. The Arizona heat hit me like a wall as I exited Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. I rented a car and drove straight to my parents' house, prepared for the renovations Mom had mentioned. To my surprise, the house looked exactly the same from the outside, with no dumpsters, construction vehicles, or any signs of ongoing work. No one answered when I rang the doorbell, which was not surprising since I had not announced my visit. I called my mother's cell phone, but got her voicemail. Rather than leave a message that would alert her to my presence in Phoenix, I decided to track down my father directly. I needed answers about his care situation before confronting my parents about the money. I texted Margot, asking if she knew where my father was staying during his treatment. She responded almost immediately, expressing surprise that I was asking. "I thought you knew," her text read. "Your dad is at Golden Sunset Senior, living on the east side of town. Your mom visits every Sunday after church." Golden Sunset? Not Sunset Gardens, the upscale facility with specialized Parkinson's care that my money was supposed to pay for. Confused and increasingly anxious, I plugged the address into my GPS and headed across town. Golden Sunset Senior Living was located in an aging strip mall complex, sandwiched between a discount tire shop and a payday loan store. The sign was faded, with several letters missing, making it read G_den son_et sin_ or live_ing. The small parking lot was cracked and uneven, with weeds growing through the asphalt. My heart sank as I parked and approached the entrance. This was nothing like the bright, modern facility shown in the Sunset Gardens brochures. The reception area smelled of industrial cleaner, barely masking more unpleasant odors. The linoleum floor was scuffed and dull, and the furniture looked like it had been acquired from office liquidation sales decades ago. The young woman at the front desk barely looked up from her phone as I approached. When I asked to see Thomas Thompson, she pushed a visitor log toward me without speaking. I signed in, noticing how few visitors were listed for that day. "Room 127, she finally said, pointing down a dimly lit hallway. "First floor, past the vending machines." I walked slowly down the corridor, taking in my surroundings with growing horror. The walls needed painting. Ceiling tiles were stained or missing entirely, and the few residents I saw looked neglected, slumped in wheelchairs parked against walls or shuffling slowly with walkers. No staff in sight to assist them. Room 127 had a small paper nameplate that read Thompson/Garcia, indicating my father shared the room with another resident. I knocked softly before entering, trying to prepare myself for what I might find. Nothing could have prepared me for the sight of my father. The strong, vibrant man who had raised me was now a shadow of himself, thin and pale against the white sheets of a narrow hospital bed. His hair, which had been neatly trimmed in our video calls, was long and unkempt. A half-eaten meal on a tray sat beside him, the food congealed and unappetizing. "Dad?" I said softly, moving to his bedside. His eyes, sunken but still that familiar blue, widened in surprise. "Ashley? Is that really you?" I fought back tears as I took his hand, alarmed by how cold and bony it felt in mine. "Yes, Dad, it is me. I came to see how you are doing." He tried to sit up, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. I helped adjust his pillows, noticing that his sheets were stained and that the room itself was barely large enough for the 2 beds it contained. A privacy curtain, currently pushed back, was the only division between my father's space and that of his roommate, who appeared to be sleeping. "Your mother did not tell me you were coming," he said, his voice thin and reedy. "It was a surprise," I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite my growing anger. "How long have you been here, Dad?" He looked confused, his forehead furrowing with the effort of remembering. "Since February, I think." After the diagnosis got worse. For months. He had been in this place for 4 months, while I believed he was receiving specialized care at Sunset Gardens. "How often does Mom visit?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sundays," he replied. "She comes after church for about an hour. Ryan came once, for my birthday in March." My father went on to explain that he received basic physical therapy twice a week. Nothing like the daily specialized treatments I had been led to believe he was getting. The facility had no Parkinson's specialists, just a general physician who visited once a week to check on all residents. "And the tremors are getting worse," Dad admitted, holding up his shaking hands. "The medication helps a little, but they keep changing the generic brands depending on what is cheapest that month." I excused myself, promising to return shortly, and sought out someone who could give me information about my father's care. I found a nurse named Diane who seemed genuinely concerned about the patients, despite the facility's obvious limitations. "Mr. Thompson is one of our better patients," she told me quietly. "Always polite, never complains. But honestly, this is not the right place for someone with his condition. We are a basic care facility, mostly for elderly patients who need minimal assistance. We do not have the resources or specialists for progressive conditions like Parkinson's." When I asked about payment for my father's care, Diane directed me to the facility administrator, a harried-looking woman named Ms. Patel. After verifying my identity, she pulled up my father's financial records on an ancient desktop computer. "Your parents made an initial payment of $15,000 in February," Ms. Patel explained. "That covered 3 months of care in a shared room with basic services. They have been paying monthly since then, about $4,000 per month. $15,000 out of the $75,000 I had sent. Where had the other $60,000 gone?" As I left the administrator's office, I felt physically ill. My father was warehoused in a substandard facility, while my parents had apparently spent the majority of my money elsewhere. The renovations, my mother's new watch, and Ryan's lavish wedding plans were starting to form a disturbing picture. I promised my father I would return the next day, then headed to a nearby coffee shop to collect my thoughts and decide what to do next. As I sat nursing an untouched latte, I overheard a conversation at the next table that made my blood freeze. The flowers alone cost $12,000, but Melissa insisted. "And Ryan's parents are being so generous with everything. The venue is $45,000, if you can believe it." I turned slightly to see a young woman I did not recognize talking to another woman about wedding plans. On the table between them was a wedding planner binder with Melissa and Ryan Thompson embossed on the cover. $45,000 for a venue. $12,000 for flowers. The numbers swirled in my head as I connected the dots. My brother's wedding was being funded with the money I had sent for my father's care. My parents had lied to me for months, abandoned my father to inadequate care, and diverted my money to give Ryan the wedding of his dreams. I left the coffee shop in a daze, my mind made up. I needed to confront my family about what they had done, and I needed to find a way to get my father the care he actually needed. The next morning, I drove to my brother's address, which I had looked up online. Ryan had purchased a small bungalow in a trendy neighborhood last year, another detail that had seemed surprisingly financially responsible at the time. Now I wondered if our parents had helped with that too. As I approached the house, I was stunned by the transformation of the front yard. A crew of workers was setting up an elaborate archway entwined with fresh flowers and crystal decorations. White chairs were arranged in neat rows on the lawn, and twinkling lights were being strung through the trees. A catering van was parked in the driveway, with staff unloading equipment into the garage, which had been converted into a preparation area. I parked across the street and sat watching the activity for several minutes, trying to calm my racing heart. This was clearly preparation for some kind of wedding-related event, perhaps a rehearsal dinner or bridal shower. The scale of it was astonishing for a supposedly budget-conscious couple like Ryan and Melissa. Finally, I got out of my car and approached the house. A wedding planner with a clipboard stopped me at the edge of the lawn. "I am sorry, we are setting up for a private event. Are you with the lighting crew?" "No," I replied. "I am Ryan's sister. I am looking for my mother." The planner's demeanor changed immediately. "Oh, Miss Thompson. Yes, your mother is inside supervising the caterers. Go right in." I walked through the front door into a scene of controlled chaos. The small living room had been transformed with expensive-looking decorations, and a team of people were arranging elaborate floral centerpieces on rented tables. In the middle of it all stood my mother, clipboard in hand, directing workers with the authority of a general. She froze when she saw me, her face draining of color. "Ashley, what are you doing here?" "Surprise," I said, my voice flat. "I decided to come see how Dad is enjoying Sunset Gardens." "Except he is not at Sunset Gardens, is he, Mom?" "He is rotting away at Golden Sunset, a facility that does not even have proper Parkinson's care." My mother glanced around nervously at the workers, then took my arm and led me to Ryan's bedroom, which had been converted into a storage area for wedding supplies. Boxes of custom party favors and monogrammed napkins were stacked against one wall. "Ashley, you do not understand," she began, her voice low. "Your father's condition is not as bad as the doctors initially thought. The basic care at Golden Sunset is adequate for his needs right now." "Adequate?" I repeated incredulously. "He is sharing a tiny room with a stranger. His sheets have not been changed in who knows how long. He gets therapy twice a week instead of daily. How is any of that adequate?" My mother straightened her spine, her expression hardening. "We had to make decisions for the entire family, not just your father. Ryan deserves a beautiful wedding, and we had the means to help him." "The means? You mean $75,000 that I sent specifically for Dad's care?" Before she could answer, the bedroom door opened and Ryan walked in, his expression changing from confusion to defensiveness when he saw me. "What is going on?" he asked. "Ashley, when did you get to town?" "Yesterday," I replied. "I visited Dad at the nursing home where you and Mom dumped him so you could spend my money on." I gestured around at the wedding supplies. "All of this." Ryan crossed his arms. "That is not fair. Mom and Dad decided how to allocate the family money. They thought Dad was fine at Golden Sunset, and they wanted to help me too." "Family money?" I was practically shouting now. "It was not family money. It was MY money that I sent for one specific purpose, Dad's medical care." "Well, Dad is getting care, is he not?" Ryan shot back. "And family money should benefit the whole family. You are just upset because, for once, something is about me instead of you." I stared at him in disbelief. "This has nothing to do with jealousy, Ryan. This is about lying to me and neglecting our father." My mother stepped between us. Lower your voice, Ashley. You are going to disturb the workers. We can discuss this like adults. How much of my money went to this wedding? I demanded. My mother hesitated before answering. The venue was $45,000, and we helped with some other expenses. But your father is fine. I promise you. He is not fine. Have you even spent time with him recently? Really looked at him. I visit every Sunday, she replied defensively. For an hour. He needs daily care, Mom. That was the whole point of me sending the money. Just then, Melissa appeared in the doorway, looking confused by the tension in the room. She was carrying a box of wedding programs with gold foil detailing. Is everything okay? She asked, looking between us. Ashley is upset about some family financial decisions. My mother explained smoothly. Melissa set down the box and gave me a sympathetic look that somehow made me even angrier. I am sure we can work this out. Family is all about compromise, right? The pre-wedding brunch tomorrow is going to be beautiful, and then we are leaving for our honeymoon in Italy the day after the wedding. 3 weeks in Rome, Florence, and the Amalfi Coast. You should join us for the brunch at least. Italy. I looked at my mother in disbelief. You spent my money on a 3-week European honeymoon while Dad cannot even get consistent medication? My mother had the grace to look embarrassed, but Ryan jumped in. We deserve this trip, Ash. We have been planning our wedding for months. And this might be our only chance to travel before we start a family. And what about Dad? Does he not deserve proper care after working his entire life to support this family? You are being dramatic, Ryan said dismissively. Dad is fine. The doctors said his condition has stabilized. Which doctors? The one who visits Golden Sunset once a week for 5 minutes per patient. My mother sighed heavily. Ashley, I know you are upset. But Golden Sunset is perfectly adequate for your father's current needs. When his condition worsens, we can revisit the idea of a specialized facility. When his condition worsens because he is not getting proper care now, you mean, I replied bitterly. Melissa stepped forward with what I am sure she thought was a helpful suggestion. Look, the wedding is in 2 days. Can we just get through this weekend and then sort everything out? You should really try to get over this and be happy for Ryan and me. I looked at the three of them, standing united against me, defending their decision to misuse my money and neglect my father. Something inside me broke in that moment. Get over it? I repeated quietly. Mom, what was it you said to me on the phone when you asked for the money? That you would use every penny to make sure Dad gets the best care possible. My mother looked away, unable to meet my eyes. And now you are telling me to just get over it? While Dad sits alone in that horrible place. Ryan rolled his eyes. Come on, Ash. Dad does not know the difference anyway. His mind is going with the Parkinson's. That was the final straw. I turned and walked out without another word, ignoring my mother's calls to come back. As I reached my car, my phone rang. It was Dr. Levinson, my father's neurologist from before I had sent the money. I had left him a message the previous evening. Miss Thompson, he said when I answered. I received your message about your father. I was actually going to call you soon. I have been trying to reach your parents for months about continuing your father's treatment plan, but they stopped returning my calls in February. I gripped the phone tighter. What can you tell me about his condition? Without seeing him, I cannot say for certain. But based on his previous progression, he should be receiving specialized physical therapy daily, along with a consistent medication regimen. Has that not been happening? No, I replied, my voice breaking. It has not. I checked into a hotel near Golden Sunset, emotionally exhausted but determined to help my father. That night, I researched elder law and financial abuse cases, making a list of potential attorneys in the Phoenix area. By morning, I had narrowed my options to 3 law firms specializing in elder care issues. Diana Winters of Winters Elder Law seemed the most promising, with extensive experience in cases involving financial exploitation of seniors. Her website featured testimonials from families she had helped in situations disturbingly similar to mine. I called her office first thing in the morning and was relieved when they offered me an appointment that same day. Diana's office was professional but welcoming. with comfortable seating and soft lighting that contrasted sharply with the harsh fluorescence of golden sunset. Diana herself was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that instantly put me at ease. I explained my situation in detail, showing her the transfer receipts for the $75,000, text messages and emails with my parents discussing my father's care, and photos I had taken of golden sunset and my father's current condition. Diana listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned forward, her expression serious. What you are describing, Ashley, is a clear case of financial exploitation and elder neglect. The fact that your parents diverted funds specifically designated for your father's care to other purposes gives us several potential legal approaches. What options do I have? I asked. Based on what you have told me, we could pursue this as financial fraud, since you sent the money under false pretenses. We could also approach it as elder abuse, focusing on your father's inadequate care. Additionally, we could argue breach of contract, since there was a clear agreement about how the funds would be used. She pulled out a legal pad and began outlining a strategy. First, we need to establish your standing to act on your father's behalf. Does he have an existing power of attorney document? Not that I am aware of, I admitted. Then our first step will be to file for emergency conservatorship. Given the circumstances, a judge would likely grant you temporary authority to make medical and financial decisions for your father while we sort out the larger legal issues. Over the next few hours, Diana explained the process in detail. We would need my father's permission to proceed, medical evaluations documenting the inadequacy of his current care, and evidence of the financial misappropriation. I returned to Golden Sunset that afternoon, this time with Diana accompanying me. We found my father more alert than the previous day, and Diana gently explained why we were there. To my relief, Dad understood the situation better than I had expected and agreed to let us help him. I did not want to cause trouble, he explained, his voice trembling slightly. Your mother insisted this place was all we could afford, and I did not want to be a burden. I held his hand as Diana explained the conservatorship process. This would give Ashley the legal authority to make decisions about your care and manage your finances temporarily, Mr. Thompson. Do you understand what that means? My father nodded. I trust Ashley, he said simply. She always had a good head on her shoulders. After getting my father's written consent, Diana and I arranged for an independent medical evaluation. Dr. Marcus, a neurologist specializing in Parkinson's, conducted a thorough examination the following day and provided a detailed report of his findings. Your father's condition has deteriorated significantly in the past few months, Dr. Marcus explained. The inconsistent medication regimen and lack of appropriate physical therapy have accelerated his decline. With proper care, we could potentially recover some function. But the longer he remains in inadequate care, the more permanent the damage becomes. Armed with this evaluation, Diana filed for emergency conservatorship. While waiting for the court date, I used my credit cards to move my father to a temporary care facility that specialized in Parkinson's treatment. It was not as comprehensive as Sunset Gardens, but it was far superior to Golden Sunset, with qualified staff and appropriate therapy programs. The difference in my father was noticeable almost immediately. With consistent medication and daily therapy, his tremors became less severe, and he began to regain some of his strength. Most importantly, the clouded, confused look in his eyes began to clear, replaced by glimmers of his old self. Meanwhile, Diana and I continued gathering evidence. We obtained records from Golden Sunset showing the limited payments my parents had made. We documented the timeline of my financial transfer and the subsequent wedding expenses. Diana even helped me track down my father's former doctor, who provided written statements about the recommended course of treatment that had been abandoned. As we dug deeper, we discovered that my parents had not only misused my money, but had also begun accessing my father's pension funds without his knowledge or consent. They had opened a new account in their names only, diverting the monthly payments away from the joint account my father had previously shared with my mother. This strengthens our case considerably, Diana explained. It shows a pattern of financial exploitation, not just a one-time misallocation of funds. The legal process was exhausting and emotionally draining. Each new discovery of my parents' deception felt like a fresh wound. I struggled with feelings of guilt for taking legal action against my own family, balanced against the undeniable evidence of their betrayal and neglect of my father. A few old family friends reached out after hearing about the situation from Margot. Some offered support and confirmed what I already knew, that my father had been sidelined while my parents focused on Ryan's wedding. Others defended my parents, suggesting I was overreacting to what they characterized as a simple misunderstanding about how the money should be used. I tried to tune out these conflicting voices and focus on the facts. My father's health was improving with proper care. The money I had sent had been misappropriated. My parents had lied repeatedly about the situation. These were not matters of opinion or perspective. They were demonstrable truths that would soon be presented in court. 3 days before Ryan's wedding, the emergency conservatorship hearing was scheduled. I had not spoken to my parents or Ryan since our confrontation, though they had made multiple attempts to contact me, likely after receiving the legal notices Diana had served. As the court date approached, I felt a strange sense of calm replacing my initial anger and hurt. This was no longer about punishing my parents or feeling betrayed. It was about standing up for my father, who could not stand up for himself, and ensuring that the remainder of his life would be lived with dignity and proper care. The night before the hearing, I visited my father at his new facility. He seemed nervous about the impending legal battle, but resolute in his support of my actions. "I never wanted it to come to this, Ash," he said, his voice stronger than it had been at Golden Sunset. "But sometimes doing the right thing means making hard choices." I squeezed his hand gently. "We will get through this together, Dad. Tomorrow is just the first step." The courthouse was imposingly formal, with high ceilings and wood-paneled walls that seemed designed to intimidate. I arrived early with Diana, reviewing our strategy one final time before the hearing began. My father remained at his care facility, his doctor having advised against the stress of a court appearance given his condition. Just before the scheduled start time, my parents arrived with their attorney, a stern-looking man in an expensive suit. My mother attempted to approach me, but Diana politely intercepted her, suggesting all communication should go through our respective counsel. From across the room, I could see the strain on my mother's face. She looked like she had aged years in the days since our confrontation. My father was not wearing his usual confident expression, instead appearing uncertain and almost fearful. For a moment, I felt a twinge of doubt about proceeding, but then I remembered my father's condition at Golden Sunset, and my resolve hardened. The emergency hearing was relatively brief. Judge Harriet Coleman, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, reviewed the filings and listened to opening statements from both attorneys. Diana presented the medical evaluations, financial records, and my testimony about the events leading up to this point. My parents' attorney argued that they had acted in what they believed was the best interest of the family as a whole, characterizing the situation as a simple disagreement about financial priorities. Judge Coleman asked pointed questions about the original purpose of the $75,000 and the disparity between the care my father needed and what he had actually received. "Let me be clear," she said, looking directly at my parents. "You received funds specifically designated for specialized care for Mr. Thompson, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," my mother replied. "And instead of using those funds for that purpose, you placed Mr. Thompson in a facility that by all medical accounts was inadequate for his condition, and diverted a significant portion of the money to your son's wedding expenses. We believed the care was adequate," my father's attorney interjected. Judge Coleman raised an eyebrow. "The medical evaluations and evidence strongly suggest otherwise, Counselor." After considering all the evidence, Judge Coleman granted the emergency conservatorship, giving me temporary legal authority to make medical and financial decisions for my father. She also ordered a full accounting of how my money had been spent and scheduled a follow-up hearing to address the misappropriation of funds. Given the evidence presented, I find there is sufficient cause for concern about Mr. Thompson's welfare to warrant this emergency action, she stated. A more permanent arrangement and potential financial remedies will be addressed at a later date. As we left the courtroom, my brother Ryan was waiting in the hallway. He had apparently slipped in during the proceedings. His face was flushed with anger. "Are you happy now?" he hissed as I passed. "You have ruined everything." The venue just called to say they are canceling because the final payment did not go through. "The wedding is in 2 days, Ashley." 2 days? Diana placed a restraining hand on my arm, but I paused to face my brother. "I am sorry about your wedding, Ryan. Truly. But this was never about ruining anything for you. It was about making sure Dad gets the care he deserves." "You could have waited until after the wedding," he snapped. "But no, it always has to be about you and what you want." I shook my head sadly and continued walking. There was nothing more to say. The full legal proceedings took place over the following weeks. Judge Coleman appointed a forensic accountant to trace exactly how my money had been spent. The results were damning. Of the $75,000 I had sent, only $15,000 had gone to my father's care at Golden Sunset. $45,000 had paid for Ryan's wedding venue, $12,000 for flowers and decorations, and the remaining $3,000 had been spent on my mother's new watch and furniture. Additionally, the investigation revealed that my parents had diverted nearly $30,000 from my father's pension over the previous 4 months, using it for wedding-related expenses and personal items. At the final hearing, Judge Coleman's ruling was unequivocal. She granted me permanent conservatorship of my father and ordered my parents to repay all misappropriated funds within 30 days, plus additional damages for the declining health my father had suffered due to inadequate care. The court takes a very dim view of financial exploitation, particularly when it involves a vulnerable individual with a progressive medical condition, she stated. The evidence clearly shows that funds designated for medical care were diverted for other purposes, resulting in tangible harm to Thomas Thompson. To meet the court's repayment order, my parents were forced to sell their house and liquidate most of their possessions, including my mother's jewelry and my father's collection of vintage watches that he had accumulated over decades. The court placed liens on their remaining assets until the judgment was satisfied in full. Ryan's wedding went forward, but in drastically reduced form. Instead of the lavish event at an exclusive venue, they held a small ceremony in Melissa's parents' backyard. Many guests who had been invited to the original wedding did not attend the scaled-down version, either out of confusion about the last-minute changes or because they had heard rumors about the family scandal. The fallout extended beyond the immediate financial consequences. Word of the situation spread throughout my parents' social circle and our extended family. People took sides, with some supporting my actions to protect my father and others condemning me for taking my own family to court. My mother's closest friends, including Margot, distanced themselves from her when they learned the full story of how my father had been neglected. Through it all, I remained focused on ensuring my father received proper care. The recovered funds went into a protected account that could only be used for his medical expenses. I arranged for him to be transferred to a facility similar to the original Sunset Gardens, with specialized Parkinson's treatment programs and a comfortable private room where he could maintain his dignity. Ryan and I did not speak for months after the court ruling. My parents made occasional attempts to contact me, but our conversations remained strained and formal, limited to updates about my father's condition. The trust that had been broken seemed impossible to repair, at least in the short term. Yet, amidst the family turmoil, there was one undeniable bright spot. My father's health showed marked improvement under proper care. The specialized therapy helped him regain some mobility, and the consistent medication regimen reduced his tremors significantly. While Parkinson's remained a progressive condition with no cure, the quality of his daily life improved dramatically compared to his time at Golden Sunset. In a private moment during one of my visits, Dr. Carson, his new neurologist, confirmed what I had suspected. If he had remained in that inadequate facility for much longer, the damage would likely have been irreversible, she told me. Your intervention quite possibly added years of quality life to his prognosis. It was validation that the painful family rift had been necessary, but it provided little comfort on the lonely evenings when I reflected on how dramatically my family had changed. 6 months after the court ruling, I made the difficult decision to relocate from Boston to Phoenix. My firm was surprisingly supportive, allowing me to transfer to their Arizona office and even offering a flexible schedule so I could be more involved in my father's care. I found a small apartment within 10 minutes of his care facility, enabling me to visit almost daily. Sunridge Care Center, where my father now lived, was everything that Golden Sunset was not. The building was modern and bright, with wide hallways and large windows that filled the space with natural light. The staff knew each resident by name, and specialized therapists worked with my father every day on exercises designed specifically for Parkinson's patients. Dad had a private room with space for his own furniture and mementos, including photographs from his younger days and the model ships he had once loved to build. The walls were painted a warm blue that he had chosen himself, and a small patio allowed him to sit outside on nice days, enjoying the desert air without the summer heat. The transformation in his physical and mental state was remarkable. While Parkinson's continued its slow progression, the proper medication and therapy had restored much of his functionality. His hands still trembled, but he could feed himself most days. His voice remained soft, but had regained some of its clarity. Most importantly, the spark had returned to his eyes, along with his dry sense of humor that had been absent during his time at Golden Sunset. You know, he told me one afternoon as we sat on his patio drinking iced tea. I never thought I would say this, but sometimes a family falling apart is what it takes for the truth to come out. I looked at him questioningly, and he continued, for years. Your mother and I presented one face to the world while living something different behind closed doors. The perfect couple, the perfect parents. But perfection is exhausting, Ashley. And eventually, it breaks. He explained that he and my mother had been struggling in their marriage for years, with financial tensions and different priorities driving them apart long before his diagnosis. Ryan had always been my mother's focus, while Dad had concentrated on his work and, when possible, on me. I should have been stronger, he admitted. Should have spoken up when I saw your money being spent on the wedding. But after so many years of avoiding conflict, it becomes your default. I am sorry I put you in this position. I squeezed his hand gently. You have nothing to apologize for, Dad. I am just glad you are getting the care you need now. My relationship with my mother and Ryan remained complicated. After the initial anger subsided, my mother had begun making cautious attempts at reconciliation. She visited my father once a week, always during scheduled hours when the staff could monitor their interaction. These visits were initially supervised by facility staff at my request, but as time passed and it became clear she posed no threat to his well-being, the supervision requirement was lifted. She and my father would never live together again, that much was certain. The court had granted them a legal separation as part of the overall settlement, with provisions for my father's ongoing care taking precedence over any division of their remaining assets. My mother now lived in a small apartment and worked part-time at a local department store, a humbling change from her previous lifestyle. Ryan's situation had evolved in unexpected ways. The scaled-down wedding had gone forward, but his marriage to Melissa had lasted only 4 months. Without the expensive trappings of a fairy tale wedding and European honeymoon, the relationship had quickly revealed its fragile foundation. They separated amidst mutual recriminations, with Melissa reportedly telling friends that Ryan's family drama had ruined everything. To my surprise, Ryan reached out to me shortly after his separation. Our first meeting was tense and awkward, neither of us quite knowing how to bridge the chasm that had formed between us. But as we talked, something shifted. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, we spoke honestly about our childhood, our parents, and the different ways we had been treated growing up. "I always resented how Dad favored you," Ryan admitted. "How he bragged about your accomplishments while barely acknowledging mine. It made it easy to justify taking your money for my wedding when Mom suggested it. In my mind, you owed me somehow. And I resented how Mom always made excuses for you," I replied. "How you got bailed out of every problem while I was expected to handle everything perfectly on my own." We were far from resolving all our issues. But that conversation opened a door to a relationship based on truth rather than the performed harmony of our childhood. Ryan began visiting Dad regularly, sometimes even joining me to learn about his care routine and medication needs. As for me, the journey had transformed my understanding of family in profound ways. I had always believed that family meant unconditional support and trust, but now I understood that true family was more complicated. Sometimes love meant setting boundaries. Sometimes it meant fighting for someone who could not fight for themselves, even when that fight pitted you against other people you loved. I also learned that forgiveness did not necessarily mean forgetting or returning to the way things were before. I could forgive my mother and Ryan for their actions while still maintaining the boundaries necessary to protect myself and my father from further harm. Forgiveness was a process, not a single moment of absolution, and it required honesty on all sides. The financial cost of moving to Arizona and the legal battle had depleted much of my savings, forcing me to start over in many ways. But sitting with my father, watching him engage with his physical therapist or concentrate on a crossword puzzle with steady determination, I knew every penny had been worth it. "You know what I have learned through all this?" my father said to me one evening as I was preparing to leave after our daily visit. "True wealth is not about money in the bank. It is about how we care for each other when things get hard. By that measure, Ashley, you are the richest person I know." As I drove home that night, I reflected on how differently things might have turned out if I had not made that surprise visit to Phoenix. If I had accepted my mother's excuses and Ryan's justifications. If I had prioritized family peace over my father's well-being. The thought sent a chill through me despite the warm Arizona evening. Sometimes doing the right thing means making difficult choices and facing painful consequences. Sometimes it means standing alone and trusting that the truth will eventually vindicate you. And sometimes it means redefining what family means to you, focusing on the bonds built on respect and genuine care rather than merely shared DNA. If you have ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love, I would love to hear your story in the comments. Your experiences might help someone else facing a similar situation right now. Please subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about standing up for what is right, even when it is hard. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is not staying silent to keep the peace, but speaking up to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Thank you for listening to my story.